Listen to the tide. It rolls in slow and heavy, pushing the harbor against its stone walls like a broad hand. Lanterns throw ovals of light on wet planks. Ropes creak. Timber answers timber in a quiet language of knocks. It is autumn on the coast of France. The wind tastes of salt and wood smoke. Somewhere out of sight, a bell counts the hour. What vanished from this harbor? What sailed under low canvas and left only a rumor on the water? By the end of our time together, you will understand what we truly know about the Templar ships, what the records do and do not say, and how a small gap in the paper trail grew into one of history's favorite mysteries. You will learn how medieval ports worked, how kings hunted debt, and how a story can rise like mist and never quite burn away. But what exactly happened on that October week in 1307? We begin with the Order of the Temple. The Templars, men in white mantles marked with red crosses. For 2 centuries they guarded roads, held castles, moved money and shipped grain, arms and pilgrims across the sea. Their life was rule and routine. Prayer, training, accounts, sail plans written not in ink alone but in the habit of seasons and the feel of the wind. La Rochelle was one of their western doors to the ocean. The town faced the Bay of Biscay, a gray mouth that could be generous in summer and cruel in storm. Why would a military order need ships? Because supply is the hidden half of every victory. After the fall of Acre in 1291, the Templars no longer held a major fortress in the Holy Land, but they still moved money and goods. They had estates across Europe. Ports tied those estates together. A ship carried not only cargo but messages, orders, and sometimes the quiet weight of coin. To run an order like the Temple, you needed barns, ledgers, and hulls. Did anyone count those hulls in La Rochelle? Here the air thins. We have references to Templar activity in ports like La Rochelle and Marseille, but we do not have a neat page that lists a fleet by name and number, sitting ready on the very eve of disaster. We have a king's need. We have a pope's worry. We have arrests ordered for a Friday, the 13th of October, 1307. And we have a later rumor that the ships were gone when the king's men came, that the Templars slipped away into the dark. But why would the king turn on the Templars? Philip IV of France owed money. War is expensive. Royal splendor is expensive. He had already squeezed the bankers of Lombardy and the Jews of his realm. The Temple, with its network and its treasure-keeping reputation, stood in easy reach. Accuse, arrest, seize. If the Pope objected, keep pressing. Pressure could be turned like a capstan. Slow, relentless, and always in one direction. Did the Pope try to stop him? Pope Clement V was cautious and ill at ease. He moved the papal court to France. He worried about the charges, idols, spitting, denials, but he also depended on the French crown. So the machine began to turn. Warrants were sealed. Orders went out at night. On the morning of the 13th, the Temple brothers woke to fists on their doors. In many places they were taken without a shout. The plan was broad and quick. Surprise was a weapon. If surprise is a weapon, what defense is left? A ship, perhaps. A ship offers distance. But a ship is not a door you simply walk through. You need crew. You need tide. You need a pilot to clear the bar and the shoals. You need weather that will not break you in the first day's run. You need to load what you value most and do it faster than fear can find you. What would they value enough to risk the sea at night? Here the story widens. People say treasure, and they imagine chests of coins and gleaming relics. The Templars did hold valuables. But treasure also meant parchment. It meant charters that confirmed rights to land and mills. It meant ledgers that proved who owed what, and where grain should flow next harvest. Money is a weight. Paper is a power. If you plan to rebuild, you save your proofs. Would paper be worth a midnight run? In a world built on oaths and seals, yes. A single charter could anchor an estate. A ledger could reconstruct a network after a storm of arrests. Still, coin would go too. A ship can carry both, tucked into chests and barrels, wrapped in waxed cloth, hidden under sacks of salt fish. A careful quartermaster can make a cargo look simple from the quay and rich once clear of land. But did they actually sail? Step back with me onto the damp boards of La Rochelle. Hear the gulls. See low shapes moving between a row of carts and the shadowed hulls. Lanterns pass slowly then stop. Someone speaks in a low voice. A rope is eased, not dropped. A gangplank scrapes and is lifted a hand's width. A pilot mutters about wind. The outer road steadies, a reminder that the sea cares nothing for politics. How many ships would it take? Not many. Medieval fleet does not always mean a forest of masts. A handful of cogs could carry a great deal. A single stout vessel could round the point and, with luck, make the run down the coast for Portugal or across the channel if the weather held. The fewer the ships, the less the notice. The less the notice, the greater the chance. But who saw them go? This is the hard part. We want a witness. We want a note in a town book. On such a night, Templar ships departed. We do not have it. We have later writers who repeat the idea, and we have silence where we might crave sound. Silence is not proof of absence, but it is not evidence of a midnight parade either. Silence is a room in which stories grow to fit the shape our hopes or fears require. Could the king's officers have simply missed them? They might have arrived after the hour. They might have sealed the town while the ships were already at sea. Or they might have found very little because there was very little to find. It depends on whether you believe the Templars expected the blow. The warrants were secret, but rumors travel like smoke. A brother in one house hears that another house has been questioned. A friendly clerk warns a sergeant who owes him a kindness. A day is enough time to move a chest from one side of a yard to another. A night is enough time to move a chest to a ship. If they sailed, where first? South offers Portugal. West is open ocean and risk. North is England. East is only possible by river and road. Portugal has a special place in this story because later the Order of Christ appears there, inheriting parts of the Templar estate with a new name. But that is later. For now, we hold on the deck, feel the ship breathe under us, and imagine the line of foam unspooling behind the stern as La Rochelle fades. Did the weather allow it? Autumn seas can be kind for a night and cruel the next. Sailors listen to wind like farmers listen to soil. A pilot who knows the local bars can guide a ship out between tides. Beyond the harbor, the swell sets its own terms. A captain may choose to hug the coast to find shelter if a gale rises, or reach for deep water to ride a steadier rhythm farther offshore. How do we move from rumor to knowledge? We move by touching records. We read trial transcripts. We study inventories of seized goods. We trace property transfers in the months and years after the arrests. Where lands and mills ended up, where coin balances were claimed or denied, these small lines on parchment tell us more than a single dramatic note would have. The story becomes plainer but not less human. But why does the legend hold us if the papers are quiet? Because a harbor at night is a perfect stage. Because the idea of a last, clever escape speaks to something we want from the world, that the hunted can still find a road, that those who planned well can bend fate a little, that secrecy for once belongs to the just. It is comforting to imagine a white sail ghosting past the reach of a greedy king. What if comfort and truth are not enemies? Then we can hold both. We can accept that the evidence for a large, organized midnight departure is thin, while still respecting the possibility that some men and some valuables moved by water before nets closed on the land. A legend may decorate a kernel of fact. The task is to strip the decoration carefully and see if the kernel remains. So what promise can I make to you as we travel? I will not trade certainty where there is none. I will show you how a medieval port worked and what shipping in that season meant. I will point to what the paper trail shows and where it breaks. I will take you along the coast that a cautious master might choose, and into the halls where kings counted coins. I will trace the afterlife of the Templars in new robes and new names. We will bring the night and the ledger into the same light. Does the night feel colder now? The tide swings. A barge grates softly. Somewhere, far out, a bell answers the one on shore, thin as a pin in the dark. In that sound there is patience. The sea is not in a hurry. Neither are we. We will move at an easy pace because this is a story for gentle learning, not a chase. The harbor will still be here when we return with sharper eyes. What comes next? We will step back from the quay and look at the people behind the cross and the mantle. We will meet the men who took vows, the officers who kept books, the brothers who stood guard in wind and rain, and the merchants who shook their hands. We will learn how an order becomes a bank without forgetting it is also a barracks. We will keep our questions small and steady. For now, breathe with the water. It rises and falls. The ropes creak, the planks answer, and the town settles its shoulders as the hour turns. If ships left this place under cover of dark, they did not do it with a shout. They did it with habit, with calm, and with the kind of silence that comes only from long practice. Let that image rest. Let it fold into your mind like a sail in a locker. When you are ready, we will walk inland and meet the men who built the road to this night. And so we close the harbor's lanterns for a while and follow the line of the road toward the temple's halls. The sea will wait. The ledgers will open. The story, like a tide, will return. Walk with me inland from the harbor. Lantern light slips from the water and becomes firelight on stone. The sound of rigging fades to the soft scrape of sandals on cloister floors. We pass a gatehouse, an inner yard, a chapel with a plain door. The red cross is stitched onto white cloth. It is simple by design. It says, "Less of me, more of the vow." In the early 12th century, after crusading armies had taken and then struggled to hold cities in the Levant, the roads filled with pilgrims. They came hopeful and poor, hopeful and well-born, hopeful and tired. The roads between ports and holy places were dangerous. Bandits watched the bends. The idea was direct. Some knights would vow to guard the ways. They would be monks who rode. They would live under a rule. They would stand between the traveler and the knife. Recognition followed. Church councils spoke. A rule was shaped: plain food, plain clothes, no gold or bright embroidery, no hunting for sport, no long hair, obedience to the master, prayer at fixed hours, service as the center of life. A famous abbot, Bernard of Clairvaux, wrote in praise of these new warrior monks, telling Christendom that discipline could tame the sword. This official embrace gave the Order of the Temple a public face and a protected path to grow. But why did Christendom embrace soldiers in a monk's habit? Daily life in the temple made the answer visible. The brothers began their day before the sun in prayer. They ate together at long tables. They wore the same things in winter and summer, with small allowances for cold, not for fashion. Linen next to skin, wool above, a belt for utility, a mantle for warmth and identity. Their armor was state property, issued and inspected. Their horses were counted and recorded, 2 or 3 for a knight, 1 for a sergeant, and a squire tended them as part of the system, not as private help. What did a day actually feel like? It felt planned. After prayer came work. Knights trained, drilled, and rode. Sergeants, who were mounted but of lower status, did the same and also took on heavier physical tasks. Chaplains heard confessions and kept the rhythm of worship in far-flung houses. Clerks copied letters and accounts. A bell told the hour. The house's draper saw to clothing. The cook fed the body. The marshal oversaw the horses and the fight. Routine made a kind of quiet even on days of noise. Ranks and offices kept the order running across continents. At the top stood the master, elected, responsible, and worn down by letters and travel. The seneschal handled administration when the master was absent. The marshal commanded in the field and guarded the horse lines like a treasurer guards a vault. In each region, a commander, often called a preceptor, ran a house or district. Chaplains were few but crucial. They tied the order's soul to its schedule. The rule did not ignore detail: how many blankets, what to do with spoils, when to speak and when to be silent. How does a monastery become a network without losing its center? The short answer is property plus habit. The order acquired farms, mills, vineyards, bakeries, and pasture. Not by conquest in Europe, but by gifts, trades, and careful management. Each house of the temple, each commandery, worked like a node. It produced grain, wool, wine, or rent. It took in donations. It kept ledgers that recorded what came and what went. In one sense, a commandery was an estate with a chapel. In another, it was a cell in a body that reached from Ireland to the edges of Syria. From working the land and guarding the roads, the brothers slid almost naturally into finance. Pilgrims who feared theft on the way could deposit coin at a temple house at home, receive a written note, and redeem value from a temple house abroad. Merchants found it convenient to transfer funds through the order's trusted books. Kings noticed that a disciplined network with steady habits could also keep royal deposits and make large payments on schedule. But why did people trust them with money? Trust came from 3 strands braided tight. First, reputation. Vows of poverty and obedience promised restraint. Second, reach. A note issued in London meant something if you could redeem it in Acre. Third, protection. The order's immunity from some local laws and taxes, granted by popes over time, insulated deposits from casual seizure. A sealed letter carried by a temple courier might cross borders that would have stopped a merchant's servant. The order's honesty was human, not angelic, but its structure made reliability likely. Ships and barns tied the same knot. You cannot guard a fortress far away without grain to feed it, anvils to repair it, timber to prop its roof, and coin to pay its garrison. The temple learned sea rhythms because sea rhythms fed land walls. Ports like La Rochelle, Marseille, and others served as funnels. In summer, hulls filled with wheat, wine, oil, and iron. In winter, sails were cautious and warehouses grew important. A knight who could fight at a ford also knew to respect a tide table. Could a warrior really read a ledger as well as a chart? Often, someone in the house did both at different points in his life. The order prized competence. Brothers who had a gift for numbers were set to numbers. Those who handled animals handled trains of pack mules and strings of horses. Those who could keep peace with town officials became the faces of the order at market. Letters moved constantly: orders, inventories, accounts, requests for indulgences, pleas for replacements of worn gear. The temple's strength was not mystery but organization. 3 small portraits make this less abstract. Imagine a knight brother, born to a minor noble family, who saw the rule as a path to clean purpose. He rides hard, prays regularly, and accepts correction when he is proud. Imagine a sergeant, city-born, who knows how to mend a harness and how to haggle for oats. He explains prices to the knight with patient respect. Imagine a clerk with a neat hand, who can copy a charter in a day and likes the quiet scratch of the quill as much as any man likes a fresh wind. What kept pride from rotting the order from within? Not perfection. There were scoldings and punishments. The rule set penances for disobedience, for fighting among brothers, for breaking silence, for taking more food than allowed, for misusing the order's things as if they were personal. A brother might lose his place in line or his mantle for a time. He might be sent to a harsher house. He might be told to eat on the floor for a week. The aim was not humiliation for sport but a return to clean lines. Even so, the temple's privileges created tension with neighbors. Exemptions from some taxes and tithes made parish priests resentful at times. The right to build their own chapels pulled worshippers away from local churches. The right to bury dead on temple land could mean lost fees for the parish. Agreements and disputes piled up like straw in a barn. Most harmless, some prone to spark. The order learned to be diplomatic because its survival depended on being a good neighbor while staying a distinct house. If they lived openly in towns and counted in clear books, why did they seem secret? Because chapter meetings were private, because vows were spoken behind closed doors, because the uniform was stark, because silence can look like secrecy when others talk easily. The brothers did not parade their inner customs. A guest saw the hall and the chapel in the yard. He did not watch confessions or vote in elections. Rumor always fills a room when the door is shut, especially if the men inside carry power and coin. Their fighting was as practical as their farming. In the east, the brothers took posts along borders, rode in patrols, and joined armies under princes and kings. They helped to hold castles. They also lost battles. They were not iron and the world is not a board. The fall of Acre in 1291 ended the order's central reason for holding coastal strongholds in the Holy Land. After that, the temple's soldiers were fewer in the east and its managers were more visible in Europe. What changed after the last strongholds were gone? The flow of resources that once supported garrisons there now reinforced the order's European houses. The temple kept doing familiar work, guarding roads, lending structure to travel, collecting rents, managing estates, and moving funds for great lords. Ports remained valuable because ports connected everything else. A house in the interior might send wool to a coastal preceptory, which would sell it abroad and credit the proceeds back through the chain. The system still made sense even without castles to feed. Kings used the order as a bank because it was useful to do so. They did not love the independence that made it reliable. A crown could ask for a loan and be told no or not yet or not on those terms. A crown could learn, while using the order's reach, how much the order owned and where. Respect can curdle into envy. In the years before the arrests, a shrewd observer could see that too much usefulness to a king can become a weakness if that king grows desperate. But why take all this care to understand ranks and rules and barns and boats? Because when we return to the harbor at La Rochelle and ask whether ships could have left, we will think with truer tools. We will know what would have been moved first. Ledgers and charters because they rebuild claims. Coin because it pays for oats and oars. People because a trusted quartermaster is worth his weight in silver. We will know how many men it takes to make a ship ready in a night because we have watched a house count lanterns and horses and cloaks. The men themselves were not myths. They got sick. They argued. They sometimes failed their vows and were corrected or dismissed. They also kept thousands of small promises each day, to be on time, to fit a saddle properly, to send the right measure of rye to the right mill at the right hour. This kept the order alive far more than any dramatic charge on a battlefield. The plain work of keeping oaths is what makes institutions sturdy. A last picture for this chapter. A long table near dusk. Bread, beans, a bit of fish. A brother reads from a devotional text while others eat. The talk afterward is soft and brief, no boasting, no sharp jokes. A clerk carries a basket of letters to the adjoining room. A sergeant checks the latch on the stable door. A knight oils a strap and lays it neatly aside. The bell sounds once, twice. The day, like a well-made rope, holds its tension but does not snap. And so we draw this house in simple lines. Vows that make a shape, ranks that give it joints, farms and ports that feed it, ledgers that remember for it. Nothing here is magic. Everything here is habit organized toward a purpose. The myth of the temple is armor clattering on stone. The truth of the temple is also a quill moving across a page. Both mattered. Both will matter when power turns its face toward the order and asks hard questions. Let the sounds of the house fade now. The broom on the threshold, the last bucket set down, the chapel door eased shut. The road back to the harbor is still there, and beyond it the road to the palace and the papal court. In the next chapter we will walk into rooms where kings count and popes hesitate, where debts press like winter and policy moves by sealed letter. The night will not come suddenly, it will gather. For now, rest with the plain image of the red cross on white, and feel how a vow can be both shelter and summons, both home and the path that leads away. Inside a counting room, candles breathe small halos into the dark. Wax drips. A clerk moves a pile of silver coins from one plate to another and listens to the soft, steady click. The air smells of wool cloaks, tallow and old wood. This is not a battlefield. It is the place where power measures itself. At the head of this world sits Philip, King of France, tall, quiet and exact. He knows that armies march on coin, that palaces are built with coin, and that respect tightens when ledgers balance and loosens when they do not. How did such a strong king find himself so short of cash? War is one answer. Flanders fought hard and long. Border quarrels with England ate money whether swords clashed or not. Embassies, marriages, fortresses, each has a price. Another answer is the crown's taste for display, processions, feasts, the dignity of rule shown in cloth and stone. When needs outpaced income, the king pressed where he could. You find those who broke laws. He leaned on Italian bankers, the Lombards, until some closed their books. He even changed the coinage at times, stretching value by decree and pulling it back when anger rose. Why would a king risk angering so many to fill a ledger? Because the other option was to look weak. In 1306, he expelled the Jews from his realm and seized what he could of their property and accounts. It was harsh and it brought him a quick surge of funds. But it also left a hole where skilled lenders and tax farmers had stood. Public order cracked in places. Paris itself boiled with unrest for a time. The crown learned that quick money can cost dearly in calm. Who then could bear the crown's next squeeze? The order of the temple was visible and wealthy. Its houses dotted the map. Its books were neat. Its reputation for safekeeping made kings trust it and envy it in the same breath. The temple's treasure was not a single dragon's hoard. It was a web of rents, mills, barns, notes, and coins. It was tempting because it was organized. If seized, it could be counted in a few large rooms. Did Philip truly believe the Templars were guilty of dark crimes, or simply convenient? Counselors close to him, men such as Guillaume de Nogaret, sharp in law and loyal to the crown, knew that heresy charges open doors no other key can. Call a man a thief and you need proof of a stolen bag. Call a man a heretic and you claim to save souls and cleanse the realm. You also reach for church courts and their powers. Accusations began to take shape. Secret rites, spitting on a cross, shameful kisses, denial of Christ. They were old shapes reused. They were hard to disprove once fear took hold. If the Templars lived in towns and counted in clear books, how could secret sins hide in plain sight? The order's closed chapters and private vows, meant to guard discipline, fed suspicion. Stories grow in rooms where the public cannot look. The temple's special status, its exemptions from some local courts and taxes, made neighbors resentful at times. A charge offered a release for that pressure. The time was ripe and the king's need gave the push. Across the Alps and then back into France, another figure weighed the same matter with a different scale. Pope Clement V. He was new to the office, a careful man from Gascony, and he kept his court in France rather than Rome. He had inherited a church bruised by quarrels with Philip's late enemy, Pope Boniface VIII. He needed peace with the French crown to steady his own seat. When whispers reached him about the Templars, he urged caution, asked for inquiries, and hoped to guide the matter with a light hand. Could the Pope have simply said no? He could have tried. But the balance between crown and mitre in these years was delicate. Clement wanted to examine the order himself. Philip wanted speed and surprise. The king called the Templars to Paris in good faith, he said, to discuss reforms and perhaps a merger of the temple with the Hospitallers. The Grand Master, Jacques de Molay, came to court. He stood as a guest in royal halls not long before he would stand as a prisoner. What makes heresy such a powerful lever? It moves both law and fear. If the king could claim that heresy threatened the realm, he could act quickly in the name of safety. If the Pope agreed or even hesitated, the king's hand grew stronger. Secret depositions were gathered. Informers were promised protection. The net was cast before the fish saw the line. Then the plan turned on one more tool, the sealed letter. How do you capture an order spread across a kingdom in a single morning? You write the same order many times, seal each copy, and send them to bailiffs and seneschals across the land with strict instructions. Do not open until the same appointed night. Do not act until the appointed dawn. On a late October Thursday in 1307, the packets waited on tables and in saddle bags. On the morning that followed, Friday the 13th, doors were broken, yards were surrounded, and brothers in white mantles woke to iron points and the words of arrest. Surprise was a weapon and it struck clean. What did the officers find? In many places they found men startled and unarmed, ledgers on tables, barns in order, chapels swept. In Paris they took the Temple's great house, a strong compound that held records and coin. The brothers were taken to cells. To make the accusations into proof, the crown put them to hard questioning. In that time and place, hard meant pain. Some confessed. They were shown the shape of what was wanted and told to repeat it. Men will say many things when they are afraid. If a man confesses in fear and retracts in calm, which voice should we believe? This became the heart of the struggle between king and pope. Under pressure in royal hands, some brothers spoke words the crown wanted. Later, in church hearings, some recanted and said they had lied to stop the pain. Clement had asked for the matter to come to him. Now it had come in pieces. Arrests first, stories second, truth somewhere inside the broken shell. He protested the use of torture. He tried to gather the process under papal control and to question the leaders himself. Was the Pope steering the ship or being pulled by the current? Both at different hours. He sent letters to other rulers urging them to hold the Templars for inquiry. He also issued orders, later that autumn, that pushed the investigation beyond France. He set up church commissions to examine charges region by region. It was a way to keep his hand on the helm. Yet each move also admitted the king's original stroke. The brothers were already in irons. Their houses were already sealed. The Pope could open the courtroom door. He could not unring the bell of that Friday morning. What happened to the order's goods? Royal officials drew up inventories, mundane and careful lists of houses, fields, tools, grain, horses, armor, relics, and coin. It is here, in these dull pages, that we will later find what can be known and what is lost. For now, in the weeks after the arrests, carts rolled and rooms were counted. In Paris, the king's men lifted lids from chests and weighed each stack of deniers. Across the provinces, smaller houses were checked with the same cold patience. If the king believed he had broken a nest of serpents, why count with such calm? Because the case was also a claim. To say the brothers sinned was one thing, to hold their property beyond the moment was another. The church had a say. The Hospitallers, another military order, stood nearby in the story's light. If the temple were dissolved, and that question would take years to settle, its goods would not simply fall into the crown's lap without argument. Careful lists laid the ground for careful claims. What of Jacques de Molay and the leading officers? They were questioned in Paris. Accounts from the times say that Molay first confessed to some charges and later withdrew those words. He asked to speak only to the Pope. He was allowed to do so much later and not on his own terms. Time stretched, hearings multiplied, and the simple line from arrest to verdict wandered like a river through a flat country. The crown's story wanted speed. The church's process required a slower walk. Where was the truth in all this? We hold to simple tools. The Templars were human. Any house that large and old held errors and sins. But the scale and nature of the charges, secret idols, ritual denials, do not fit cleanly with what we know of the order's plain routines, its visible life, and the lack of earlier credible witnesses. What fits cleanly is the king's need, the charge's convenience, and the method's design. Secrecy, surprise, and pain. Did anyone resist? Some local officials hesitated. Some towns murmured. A few voices at court urged caution or delay. But the plan worked as plans do when they are made by the center and dropped on the edges in the night. Most brothers were taken without a fight because they lived by a rule that did not imagine this attack. Their obedience, which had made them strong, now made them vulnerable in the hands of a secular power. What did ordinary people see? In the morning, they saw doors sealed with wax and guards posted where the white mantle had stood. They heard talk in markets. A cousin said this, a baker heard that. Rumor ran. Some believed the worst because it is easy to believe the worst when greatness falls. Some believed the best because they had seen the brothers feed the hungry and repair bridges and keep the roads watchable. The realm divided in whispers even before the first formal hearing began. Where does the sea enter this chapter? Not in the council chamber and not in the cell. It enters in logistics. When you arrest men on land, you count on the land to hold them. You seal barns and books. But harbors have their own clocks and their own ways. If any warning had flown ahead of that Friday, If even a hint had reached a pilot or a quartermaster, then goods or papers or men could have moved out by water in the days or nights before. The arrests explain the sudden silence we will see in some places. The sea explains the open question that still lifts like a mist from La Rochelle. But did the king's net reach the quays in time? That is what we will examine next. We will not argue with hope or fear. We will look at maps and winds and tides. We will see how a medieval harbor worked at the edge of a sandbar and under the eye of a town watch. We will ask how many men it takes to ready a ship, how long a tide gives you, and what route a cautious master chooses in autumn if he means to vanish without leaving a wake of talk. For now the candles in the counting room burn low. The clerk rubs his eyes. The last stack of coins is tallied and noted. Somewhere beneath the same roof, a prisoner stares at the wall and prays a simple prayer. The Pope drafts a letter that tries to stretch between duty and danger. The king closes a ledger with quiet satisfaction. The world holds its breath between pages. Let us set the book down gently and walk back toward the coast. The night air is cooler there and the sound of water steadies the mind. We have seen how a ruler's need and a churchman's caution made a single morning ring across a kingdom. In the next chapter we will bend to the practical. Piers, pilots, shoals and shipping lanes, the narrow places where legend must meet the measured world. Close your eyes, listen for the tide, and we will begin again where wood meets water. Stand again on the edge of water, but look wider this time. The harbor is not only a place, it is a pattern. It has tides that pull like breath, piers that frame the day, and people who read these signs without thinking. If a house like the temple meant to move quietly, it would lean on this pattern, the ordinary rhythm of ships and shore, so that any unusual act could hide inside the usual. Habit is the best cloak. What makes a harbor like La Rochelle a good place to disappear from? La Rochelle sits against the Bay of Biscay, shielded in part by islands and shoals. The channels between shore and the Isle de Rye and its neighbors are narrow in places, shallow in others, honest only to those who sail them often. A pilot, one of those men who sell their knowledge of sandbars and tides, was not a luxury here. He was a key. The bars off the coast rose and shifted like sleeping animals. If you timed the tide poorly, your keel would kiss the sand and hang there. If you timed it well, you slipped over the lip and felt deep water lift you like a hand. But could this have been done in haste? A ship is not a door you shut and run. It is a body that must be woken. Stevedores move sacks, barrels and chests. The mate checks rigging by feel. The cook secures his pots. The quartermaster counts water, hard bread, bacon and beans. A few extra hands might be hired from the quay for a night's work with no questions asked. Coin hushes curiosity as well as mouths. With a practiced crew, a ready hull and a tide window, hours are enough, if someone has already thought the plan through. What did these ships look like? Think of a cog, the common workhorse of the northern seas around 1300. It is clinker-built, planks overlapping like scales and stout. It rides broad in the beam with a single mast and a square sail that can be reefed to meet the wind's humor. At the stern, a fixed rudder hangs from a post, a newer improvement over steering oars, giving steadier control and chop. Capacity varies, but a good-sized cog can carry grain, timber, iron, and men in numbers that matter. The crew is not large, perhaps a dozen or two, but each knows 3 or 4 jobs because the sea demands that kind of humility. How did they find their way? By coast and compass, by lead line and memory. Mariners along this shore learned profiles of land. A church tower rising above dunes, a notch in a cliff, the line where pine gives way to heather. They also had the magnet's secret by this century. A small pivoting needle under a cap told north even when clouds hid the sky. In the Mediterranean, detailed portolan charts were becoming common. On this Atlantic rim, coastal knowledge and rougher maps, pilot notes, and talk at tavern tables guided the hand. At night, they took soundings. A lead weight on a marked line dropped to the bottom, then raised to taste it. Sand, mud, shingle, the sea's own map written in the palm. But would they dare the open sea or hug the land? They would hug the land unless weather or fear forced them outward. Coastal sailing, cabotage, meant moving from mouth to mouth. Charente, Gironde, Adour, small havens tucked behind bars and capes. Bigger river ports like Bordeaux far inland but tied to the tide. Shelter was never many hours away if you watched the sky and knew the bottom. A southbound run could be a string of short steps. Out from La Rochelle with the ebb, pause under a lee, and then take the next tide to creep along the coast. Which paths led where? North and across the channel lay England. Places like Dartmouth, Southampton and Portsmouth, used to seeing cogs come and go. East by river and road led toward Poitou, Anjou and the inland houses. South curved toward Bayonne and then the long Portuguese coast. Porto at the Doru's mouth, Lisbon along the broad Tagus, Setúbal tucked behind a bar of its own. Each name is not only a place, it is a schedule of tides, pilots, dues and officials who could be friends for a fee and trouble if crossed. Could a ship from La Rochelle reach Portugal in a quiet chain of days? In fair autumn weather, yes. A cog makes 3 to 5 knots under steady wind. Days shorten, but windows of calm still come. The Bay of Biscay can turn ugly with little warning. That is the warning every captain carries like a stone in his pocket. Still, short hops allow caution. You put in if the sky shows Maris tails or if the wind backs and growls. You wait inside a river mouth where reeds whisper and gulls complain. When the glass of the sea smooths again, you slide out with the falling tide. But what about watchers on land? Town watches kept lists and collected dues, but the sea's clock outran many. A night departure at half-tide, a lantern kept low, a pilot who knows the false lights from the true, these are small trades with time. A ship that clears the last bar before dawn may be far enough to be a name without a hull by noon. And if someone asked later, a clerk might shrug. A grain carrier, a wine carrier, one more hull among many. Ports know the scent of anonymity. How are cargoes disguised? By looking ordinary. Barrels of salted fish stack like any barrel, and under the planks between them can rest sealed chests. Coin can travel in a chest marked for tools. Parchments wrapped in waxed cloth may ride under a sleeping pallet. The safest disguise is not a clever one. It is the cargo no one is excited to see. A manifest, if any, lists staple goods. The quartermaster keeps the real list in his head, where ink cannot betray him. What tolls and papers stood in the way? Every harbor had dues and some had forms to fill with scribes nearby. But small craft eased around big rules, and big rules bent for men who wore known crosses or carried letters from lords. In any case, the busiest parts of a port were also the blurriest. Carts, animals, sacks, curses and wind. A ship already laden, crew aboard and pilot engaged can transform from present to gone, in less time than it takes a sleepy bailiff to find his superior and his seal. Could English or Iberian authorities have noticed the sudden arrival? They could, but what is sudden in a world where ships appear and vanish by weather? If a hull from La Rochelle put in at a Devon haven after 2 days of coastal sailing, it was another French trader seeking shelter or sail. If it reached Lisbon after a week of shorter steps, it joined a road of water already full of wine, wool, salt, and iron. Only a name on a tongue makes a ship more than a shape. How did wind and season argue with the plan? Autumn on Biscay speaks in gusts and lulls. Westerlies can hold you on a hard angle. Northerlies can serve a southbound sailor like a friend. A wise captain is suspicious of steady good fortune and quick to reef when night falls. He knows the cold truth. The sea is generous until it is not. If the plan demanded vanishing, the plan also demanded patience, waiting a day in a muddy creek if that day saved the whole. But could an entire fleet go unnoticed? Fleet, in our minds, often means a forest of masts. In the language of the time, it could be 3 or 5 cogs with room to spare. A modest number of hulls is less than a spectacle. It is a pattern of normal life. A harbor that sees dozens of movements each week does not remember each one. That is not negligence. That is how the sea works with towns. Keeps books in motion, not in memory. What about signals and lighthouses? Beacons burned on headlands. Church towers doubled as marks by day and sometimes as anchor points for directions told in simple phrases. Keep the white tower in line with the stand of pines and you will miss the teeth of rock. A pilot's lore turns landmarks into verbs. Keep, pass, edge, hold, until the passage becomes a sentence the ship can read. Were galleys part of this world? On the Atlantic, oared galleys were rare visitors, not resident species. They excel in the Mediterranean where water is kinder and land falls within easy reach of oar and sail both. Here, a rounder, deeper, single-masted hull ruled, cogs and their cousins. That mattered for silence. No drum for rowers to keep time, no long oar to splash and shout. A square sail, a held breath, and a boat can seem to slide rather than move. What did departure feel like at the last moment? It felt like decisions made earlier paying off. The anchor comes in, iron against wood, and the ship pivots as the pilot calls for a touch of helm. The sail rises with a soft thrum. The hull takes the first slow shoulder of swell beyond the bar and then steadies into a rhythm that a sailor's knees know better than his mind. The town dwindles behind you into a smear of roofs and a single bell. On deck, the mate coils line with hands that have done it 1,000 times. The captain looks aft once and then forward only. Could such a movement have been coordinated from shore to shore? Yes, but not by magic. By letters sent earlier, by friendships banked like coin, by shared habits across houses. A note that says, expect men and papers, no questions, does not need to name a date. It needs to be in the right drawer when a trusted face appears. The orders network was not only barns and books, it was people who had eaten at the same long tables and learned to tell truth with few words. How many days until safety? Safety is not a place, it is a radius. After a day you are hard to call back. After a week, you are a rumor on the wrong side of three tides. After a month, you merge into the local pattern somewhere else. A house that will not say no, a clerk who writes a new line in an old ledger, a stable with space for 2 more horses whose names are not asked. The sea lengthens time the way a forest deepens shadow. But what of watchers beyond kings? Merchants, rivals, neighbors? Some would notice and some would care and some would do nothing. Trade teaches a kind of politeness that is not kindness but convenience. You do not ask about my cargo, I do not ask about yours. Wind and tide is an answer to many questions. If a captain with a clean record makes a quiet landfall, men with long memories nod and take their fees. So, is vanishing by water likely or just lovely to imagine? It is possible without being grand. That is its strength. No parade, no convoy, no trumpet. Only one or a handful of hulls slipping through a normal gate with the useful cover of normal work. A harbor like La Rochelle, with bars that keep strangers cautious and pilots that locals trust, offers both difficulty to outsiders and a road to insiders. Difficulty to one eye is protection to another. Let the map fold now across the table in your mind. See the threads we have traced, the narrow channels, the lead line rising wet and gritty, the lantern lowered with a hand around its glass, the patient wait inside a river bend. The road of water is not a mystery once you learn its manners. It is a set of good habits kept at the right hour. If men of the temple meant to choose that road, they would have walked it as they walked every part of their rule, with preparation, with routine, and with a calm face turned toward the next task. The tide turns again. The pilot touches his cap and steps back into his skiff to be rowed ashore, one more figure swallowed by the harbors every day. The ship eases seaward. The wake flattens. Between 2 breaths, the land becomes memory and the plan becomes weather. That is enough for now. We have watched how the world of peers and pilots could cradle a quiet departure. In the next stretch, we will leave the water's edge and enter quieter rooms. We will unroll the paper trail, the inventories, the trial notes, the letters that tried to sort property and blame. We will test the legend against lines of ink, the patient kind of truth that outlasts storms. For tonight, let the map close, the lantern dim, and the sound of the tide settle you into a softer pace as we step from the quayside into the counting room of records. Open a quiet room. The walls are thick. The window is narrow. On the table, a clerk sets out a knife, a straightedge, a pot of ink, and a stack of folded parchment. The light is kind and even. Dust floats like slow snow. We have left the noise of the harbor to sit where stories are weighed by lines of ink. Here we do not chase rumors. We read them against what people wrote when they thought only their superiors would ever see the page. What kinds of pages do we have? We have trial records, questions and answers written by trained hands while a scribe dipped and wrote. We have inventories made by royal officers who were told to count everything in a house. Grain in bins, harness on pegs, coins in chests, silver on altars. We have letters between crown and pope, orders to the bailiffs, replies from bishops, notices to other kings. We have papal bulls sealed with lead, their Latin measured and cool. We have town books and tax lists, patchy but real, and the odd note from a merchant who had business with men in white mantles and now had business with those who came after. But which of these pages should we trust most? Begin with the inventories. They are dull by design and dullness is useful. A good inventory tells you what a room looked like on a certain day. 2 wooden tables. 6 benches. 3 iron pans. 4 bridles cracked. 1 chest banded, sealed. Coins are weighed, not counted by the piece. A mark here, a pound there. Grain is measured in sacks and set down with a clerk's small pride in exactness. These lists were made so that later someone could say, we have it all, or, something is missing. What do the inventories show? They show houses that were busy in ordinary ways. They show barns with wheat and rye. They show kitchens with pots and a little spice. They show chapels with simple chalices, candlesticks, a reliquary or 2 and a box for alms. They show stables with horses, some sound, some old. They show armor, spears, surcoats, boots, belts. In bigger houses they show stronger rooms with thicker doors, where coins sat behind boards and iron. They show no map with an arrow to a secret quay. They show no list of ships waiting under the mantle of night. But do they show everything? No list is perfect. The men who made them were honest as far as their job asked, but they did not always know what they saw. A chest might be sealed and noted simply as, "a chest sealed." The content would be for later. A clerk who never sailed might write tools when he saw blocks and tackle. An officer under pressure might move fast through a room and think he had time to return. The point is not to doubt everything, it is to remember the limits of eyes and hours. Now turn to the trial books. They are full of voices that do not sound like voices because they have been pressed through pens and forms. A question is asked. An answer is recorded. Some answers show fear. Some show stubborn clarity. Some change when pain enters the room and change again when men are moved from one jailer to another. The lines name sins and sometimes they retract them. They say, "I denied," and later, "I lied." You can feel the pressure without seeing the rope. How do we weigh words dragged out under threat? We are careful. We notice patterns. Where the same phrases appear over and over, "I spit on a cross," we ask whether the pattern grew from a real practice or from a questioner's leading hand. Where a brother says something under royal officers and later says the opposite before church judges, we note the setting. The crown's rooms used pain more quickly. The church's rooms asked longer questions. Neither was pure. Both were part of a world that believed pain could open truth. Our task is not to be harsh to the past, it is to be honest with it. A handful of pages stand out like candles in this dim. They are the reports of papal envoys who, by the Pope's order, interviewed the Templar leaders months after the first shock. They met the Grand Master Jacques de Molay and other high officers away from the king's direct hand. Those pages record confessions softened, excuses made, pleas for the order's reform rather than its ruin. Later readers called one of these records the Chinon parchment. It tells us the Pope's men heard the leaders, offered absolution for faults admitted, and looked for a way to mend rather than destroy. Did that mean the order would be saved? No. The larger machine kept turning. The Pope needed peace with the crown. The crown needed the order broken. A few years later, at a church council, the temple was dissolved not with a clean verdict of guilt proved in every charge, but with a judgment that the order had become too stained, too compromised to be trusted. Bulls followed, the measured documents of a church that speaks in long sentences. One declared the order ended. Another directed that its goods be transferred to the Hospitallers, the other great military order that had often stood beside the temple in the east. If the goods were handed to the Hospitallers, where did the missing treasure go? Here the paperwork grows thick and thorny. In principle, the transfer was simple. Fields, mills, houses, tools, and coins moved from one order's control to another's. In practice, kings and lords and local officials stood along the path and held out their hands. Some goods were already in royal vaults and were slow to leave. Some had been granted out, or rented, or quietly claimed by neighbors during the confusion. Lawsuits and appeals spread across the map like vines. Hospitaller receivers wrote letters that sound weary and exact. Send the keys. Send the list. Send the hay from that meadow you claim was yours. Years passed. The world made records of wrangling rather than a single grand delivery. So what of ships? On this point, the pages are still quiet. We do not find a docket that says, "At La Rochelle such and such a number of Templar vessels were seized," or "escaped." We find instead ordinary notes about docks and dues and later, scattered references to houses near ports becoming hospitaller houses. We find the crown's big house in Paris, the temple itself, measured and emptied. We do not find a list of masts counted and lost. Does silence mean nothing happened? Silence means the records we keep are not shaped like the thing we want. Town books from the coast often did not survive. When they did, they listed tolls in a way that blurs detail. So many barrels, so many pennies, a ship from such a port, nothing more. In a place with shifting bars, pilots kept memory in their heads rather than in neat ink. And if a house wanted to move quickly, it would have prepared in the weeks before, not on the last night. The paperwork would have been kept inward, not placed on a clerk's desk where the wrong eyes might read it. What about other kingdoms? England, Aragon, and others also made arrests, held hearings, and wrote bills. The tone changed with each realm. Some judges were skeptical of the French pattern. Some seemed eager to agree with it. In England, results were mixed. In Aragon, care was taken to sift more finely. In Portugal, the shape of the story bent toward a later solution that kept men and goods in service under a new name. None of these records, in their ordinary variety, show a clean line that runs from fleet to vanished, as if a town crier had shouted it. Where, then, did the legend take on its fuller form? Mostly afterward, strung together by writers who loved a good mystery. A harbor at night is an easy stage to imagine. Later histories, romances, and secret lineage tales look back and find a white sail gliding out of reach, because that picture satisfies the heart even when the page is quiet. The early 14th century clerks were not writing legends, they were balancing accounts. The later storytellers were not balancing accounts, they were building mood. Between those two aims lies the story that comforts and the story that counts. Could the order have moved papers and coin in the days before the blow? Yes, and the records are consistent with that quiet possibility. If a house near a port learned early that trouble was coming, its officers could slip ledgers and charters into sealed bundles and pass them along the road to a friendly town or a ship already scheduled to sail. Such movement would not cry out on the page. It would look like normal commerce. Even a chest of coin can pass as tools to a lazy or complicit hand. If small escapes were possible, why do we look for a grand one? Because large gestures are easier to tell and to remember. A single night that explains everything saves us the long patience of reading dull pages. But the dull pages are what we have, and they are not empty. They tell of a crown's harvest of goods, of a church's slow sorting of claims, of neighbors who saw a gap and stepped in, of officers who took too much and were chided, of barns that changed locks without ceremony. They tell of a world that bent but did not snap. Do any entries hint at things that do not add up? Here and there, yes. A house that ought to have held more coin shows very little. A list that should name charters offers none. A clerk writes seized previously, and we do not know by whom. Such hints could point to theft by local hands, to concealment by brothers hoping to protect what they thought holy, or to transfer to a ship or a cart just ahead of the sheriff. The papers do not tell us which. They only draw the outline of a shape and ask us not to color outside it too boldly. What about the big house in Paris? There the pages are fullest. Royal men took custody of the temple and counted with grim care. The treasure held there reflected the order's role as a keeper for others as much as its own wealth. Some of that coin was meant for payments in the kingdom. Some belonged to clients. The seizure therefore tangled property rights like a basket of ropes. Lawsuits would wind through courts for years. The size of Paris's hall makes the legend of a vast treasure fleeing by sea feel less needed. The center was struck. Much was caught. And yet, something in us still looks toward the water. We are human. We like a path that runs away from danger and into open space. The records, read slowly with generous doubt, allow for small, smart moves by men who knew their craft and their coast. They do not grant a parade of masts or a long line of chests under starlight. They do not destroy the legend. They reduce it to a human scale that is still interesting, still brave, and still possible. So what, in plain words, do the papers say? They say the Templars were taken by surprise in many places and not in all. They say much property was seized and listed. They say the Pope, trying to keep dignity and peace, ended the order by law and planned to pass its goods to the Hospitallers. They say that plan was hard to carry out cleanly. They say little about ships. They leave room for some men and some packets to move quietly before the dawn. If the truth is smaller than the legend, does it matter less? No. The smaller truth teaches more. It asks us to notice how institutions really move. By habits, by ledgers, by friendships, by the simple logistics of food and wind. It invites us to see that a strong order could be unmade not only by one king's blow but by 1,000 small practical acts that followed, by clerks, by bailiffs, by neighbors, by time. Let the room grow dim now. Close the covers gently. The knife and straight edge go back to their places. The parchment that mattered most was not always the one that shouted a dramatic scene. Often it was the one that noted, in a tidy hand, that this field now belongs to those men, and that key should be returned next week. That is how the world turns when the banners are folded. In the next chapter we will leave the ledgers for the shore again, and we will be even more exact. We will walk the actual harbor at La Rochelle as it was, feel the tug of the tide at the bar, listen to pilots talk about sand that moves like sleep, and test the question against the ground and the water. For now, let the hush of the archives ease you. The sea is waiting a few streets away, and we will meet it with the patience we have learned from ink. Come closer to the waterline. Kneel if you like and touch the skin of the harbor with your fingertips. It is cool and a little oily from tar and fish. The tide is moving as a living thing does, not forward only but in a long breath that presses and releases. Rope sigh. A gull lifts once and then circles without haste. Houses lean toward the quays like listeners at a door. In this small world, time is not kept by clocks alone but by the moon and the pull it has on every plank and post. But what exactly is a bar? A bar is a ridge of sand and gravel that lies like a sleeping beast across a harbor mouth. The tide covers it and uncovers it, sometimes by several feet, sometimes by only a little. The channel twists near it, honest only to pilots who know the set of last winter's storms and the drift of this summer's rivers. At low water, the bar shows its spine. At high water, it seems to vanish, but it does not forget. Keels that scrape it remember for months. So when is the gate open? On a chart of words, the gate opens when the height of tide above the bar matches or exceeds a cautious master's draft plus a margin he trusts with his skin. In practice, this means timing. You warp the ship from the quay in the last of the flood, let her gather herself, and slide over the lip as the tide turns to ebb, trading height for push. Miss that hour and you wait because hurry is a poor swimmer. On some nights, the window is a finger's width. On others, a hand. Could a stranger do it alone? Not here. A pilot sells what books cannot hold. The soft curve where the deeper water runs this season, the eddy that spins under a certain wind, the place where a church tower and a stand of pines line up to say safe. He climbs aboard in a skiff, calls for a touch of helm and speaks in verbs. Keep, ease, hold, pass. His fee is known. His face is known. He is a gatekeeper for hire but not for show. How much noise does a departure make? Less than you think if the crew is seasoned and the plan is simple. Barrels can be rolled on felted skids, chains lowered rather than dropped, orders given with fingers and nods. Even the sea helps. A little chop eats sound, a fresh breeze turns voices into rags. Harbor noise hides ship noise, the cluck of water against stone, the rattle of a cart, the long yawn of timbers shifting as the tide lifts them. Silence here is not the absence of sound. It is sound trained to mind its manners. How long does it take to wake a ship? A ready hull can rouse from dozing to motion in the space between two bells. The mate checks the lashings. The cook nails shut his lids. The quartermaster counts casks of water and bread by habit faster than a clerk could with a pen. Men who have done a thing 100 times do it as one body. If loading is done, if the pilot waits, if the wind is fair, the ship can be moving in an hour. If you ask more, heavy cargo at the last moment, you trade speed for risk and make a memory the quay will keep. For would the watch notice? The town watch knows faces and trouble. It does not count quiet barrels. Its lanterns float at crossings and gates and where sailors, merry or angry, are likely to sing too loud. A ship that leaves between curfew and dawn with no brawl on the quay looks like work, not a story. If a bailiff is to be fetched, he must be woken, dressed, and persuaded. Tides do not wait politely in halls with tiled floors. What about the moon? Moonlight is both friend and spy. Under a full moon, the quay is bright as a long room and small motions show like mice. Under a new moon, the dark is kind, but springs, those larger tides, run then too, making bars deeper and currents stronger. A captain who chooses darkness accepts more water moving faster. A captain who chooses light accepts more eyes. Either way, he prays for a steady wind and for men whose feet remember the deck better than their minds remember fear. Could several ships take the same gate without drawing eyes? Yes, if they do not march like soldiers. A harbor's hourglass can pass more than one grain at a time if each falls when it should. One hull goes on the first of the ebb, another on the turn, another when the pilot rows back and raises his hand. Space them by the time it takes a man to walk from the quay to a corner and back, and no one on shore will see a parade. They will see a morning that came early. What if the wind turns sullen? Then a ship may anchor just outside the bar and wait with her head to the swell, a little lantern caged on her stern to mark herself to others. The pilot will leave her there if his job is only the gate. If the wind returns, she runs on. If clouds stack and the wind backs against her, she may creep to a second shelter farther down the coast. Caution makes time. Impatience spends it. Could the sea itself hold them in? The sea holds everything in the end, but tonight it argues politely. The swell runs long and even. The wind, while not eager, is willing. The lead line comes up with smooth mud from the channel and a little grit where the bar begins. The pilot nods. He has felt this in his palms since he was a boy. He has crossed this door in fog and in rain and in a winter twilight when even the gulls were quiet. He will cross it again tonight. What does the shore give away? It gives away smell, a fog of smoke and brine. It gives away the hum of sleep in houses and the soft closing of a shutter. It gives away a bell that rings an hour no one thinks about unless they keep watch or are kept awake by worry. It does not give away names. Names belong to clerks and to the long daylight. Night uses shapes. Where would they anchor once clear? There are lee places behind low islands and along quiet bends of river mouths that a coastwise sailor knows the way a shepherd knows his shade trees. A ship that has crossed the gate may slip into such a pocket an hour or two away, lower her anchor with care, and let the men breathe. In this pocket, the quartermaster can check again what matters. Water, bread, tools, papers in their waxed wrappings, a chest wedged where it cannot dance if the sea grows lively. How do papers and coin hide in plain sight? By sitting where no one wants to put his hands first. A chest of coin can live under a layer of spare blocks and old rope that smells of tar. Few inspectors enjoy tar. Parchments wrapped in waxed cloth can be bedded under a carpenter's bench or inside a barrel of damaged gear tied with an honest-looking knot. The safest thing is not disguise but boredom. No curious man lingers long over boredom. What could go wrong ashore at the last moment? A man could be missing. A cart could break a wheel. A rumor could reach the wrong ear and wake a superior. A pilot could fall on a wet plank. The answer is redundancy. A second pilot who is a cousin to the first. A spare line laid out before the cart leaves the yard. A signal agreed upon that can be called off by a single word if the bailiff's cloak is seen at the end of the street. Plans that survive are plans that admit clumsiness and luck both. What trace would such a night leave in the morning? Marks in mud where a skiff touched. Damp scuffs on a plank. A note in no book because the man who would have written it did not see the act and will not invent it. The only real trace is absence. An empty berth. A pilot who takes his coin and bread and keeps his mouth for his wife alone. A house whose strong room is tidy and somehow lighter. Could this all be a tale told after to comfort the loyal? It could. The mind is a generous painter. But the harbor does not ask for belief, it asks for understanding. What we have laid out here is not a miracle but a method. A few hulls leaving on an ordinary tide, handled by men who know their work, would not be bright enough to blind the world. They would be as memorable as a baker lighting his oven before dawn, noticed by those who share the craft, forgotten by those who do not. How wide is the margin for error? Narrow at the gate and wider outside. Inside the harbor mouth, inches matter. Outside, a ship can fall off a point and try again. That is why a good pilot watches the line between caution and waste. He will not hoard water under the keel if it means losing the push of the ebb. He will not gamble with inches if a small delay buys certainty. This is not a gambler's art, it is a farmer's, planting in the right week, not the right minute. What would the crew be doing at each beat? At the quay, clearing lines, stowing gangplanks, lashing loose gear. In the fairway, tending sheets, watching the set of the sail, keeping the lead going in the bow. At the bar, one man with a hand on the shrouds, one on the tiller with the pilot's word in his ear, two standing by the anchor as insurance. Outside, easing the sheet a hand's breadth, rigging the steering or if needed for fine work, lashing the pump handle where it will not clatter in the night. Who else moves at this hour? Fishermen whose boats smell of nets and salt sleep lightly and rise early. A carter whose oxen breathe steam into the cold. A watchman who walks his beat and hums to prove to himself that he is not alone. None of them is a herald. They will not write the act into a chronicle. They will tell a wife, a child, a brother over bread that they saw a ship slide out between bells. Tomorrow that story will already be smaller. What makes La Rochelle different from a deep, simple harbor? The bars, the shoals, the way the land and islands make a puzzle that locals solve and strangers fear. In a deep bowl of a harbor you can blunder and be fine. Here, you blunder and you sit on sand until the tide returns and a crowd with nothing better to do comes to point. That is bad for vanity and worse for secrecy. Paradoxically, the very difficulty that threatens a clumsy escape protects a careful one. Outsiders stumble. Insiders pass. Could a rope across the mouth stop them? Chains stretched across narrow mouths existed in some places and in some years, but the wide ways here are not so easily barred. Guards and dues houses can slow men on land. The sea shrugs at ink lines. If a town commander had wanted to pen ships inside tonight, he would need boats on boats, men on men, and the sense to guess which hull to watch. Surprise belongs, for once, to those who leave, not to those who arrive. What about signals between ship and shore? Simple things. A cloak raised once in a lantern's glow. A torch shielded and then shone. A church bell rung on an odd count. A fisherman's song with a missing line. Men who live by tide and weather prefer codes made of things they already do. New habits make noise. Old habits, bent slightly, pass as themselves. If the plan were to fail, where would it fail? At the bar if the pilot is wrong. In the street if fear speaks too loudly and wakes the wrong neighbor. On deck if a rope parts because someone meant to tar it last week and did not. Failure is a patient hunter. The only defense is attention paid when nothing seems to demand it. Tar boiled on time, knots checked with fingers and not with eyes, a second set of hands for a job that one man could do. What does the first swell beyond the bar feel like underfoot? Feels like a deep breath taken after holding one too long. The hull rises and settles, no longer cushioned by the land's shape but by the sea's long hand. The pilot's face relaxes, a line you did not know was there. The captain looks at the compass and the sky and then at the faces of his men. The sound changes, less echo from stone, more open voice from under the planks. It is a good sound. It is the sound of risk moving from the narrow to the wide. And if no ships left at all, if the legend paints what the night did not, then the harbor still teaches. It shows us the limits of easy stories and the rules of a water gate that keeps no record of attempts. It reminds us that possibility is not proof and that romance is not evidence. It leaves us with a method for testing tales. Look for the tide window, ask who the pilot was, measure how many hands were free that night, see whether the morning's lists are lighter than they should be. The harbor, in its quiet way, tells us how to think. Let the pilot step down into his skiff now and push away with the small splash that means his part is done. Let the ship's lanterns be hooded. Let the wake flatten into the night. The shore folds itself back into the smell of smoke and old wood. The tide turns to a different errand. In the next chapter we will stand on the open coast with a finger on the map and a sailor's patience. We will follow the lines the ship might draw. North toward the pewter water of the Channel, south toward the long light of the Portuguese coast, west into the gamble of blue. We will listen for winds by their old names and weigh which route a cautious master would choose when he means not to be found. For now, rest with the simple picture. A narrow gate, a steady hand, a hull that knows the way from shallow to deep. Spread the coast before you like a cloth. Lay a finger on La Rochelle. Feel how the land curves north toward the Grey Channel and south toward the long light of Portugal. Hear the names that sailors speak as if they are friends. Gironda, Adour, Douro, Tagus. The sea does not offer many roads, but it offers enough. If a few Templar hulls slipped out between bells, which road would a cautious master take and why? What path would a captain choose if his aim was distance without noise? North first. Across the shallows and headlands of Poitou and Brittany, the English Channel waits like a narrow river with a temper. The tides there run like horses. On a fair wind, a cog out of La Rochelle could swing past the Brittany Capes, watch for the race at Ushant, and cross toward the south coast of England. Devon and Cornwall open their coves and river mouths like pockets stitched into a coat. Names such as Dartmouth, Foy, Plymouth, and small creeks between them know French hulls well. Wine and salt have moved there for generations. Would England welcome a quiet arrival? Not with banners, but perhaps with a shrug. In 1307 the English crown watched its own books and borders. A single French trader seeking shelter was not a surprise. Harbor officers counted barrels and collected dues. They did not ask a decent captain to unpack his life. A Templar ship looking ordinary could hide among the many who ran wool out and wine in. If a clerk looked twice, a letter from a local preceptory, polite, stamped, and conveniently vague, might turn the look into a nod. Is the Channel too crowded to be discreet? Crowding can hide as well as reveal. In fog, ships ring small bells. In wind, they pass like dark geese. The key is not to anchor under a castle but to slip into a river mouth where the tide turns slower and the reeds are the only witnesses. A week of such careful steps could carry a Templar crew to a friendly house inland, where a mantle can be hung on a peg and a name can rest. Where next if north becomes northeast? Scotland rises like a rugged thought beyond England. To reach its western inlets by water, a ship might follow the Channel east, round the long heel of Britain, and choose between the North Sea's swell and the narrow path within islands. To reach the west by the Atlantic, she would round Land's End and climb a coast not famous for mercy. Either way, the land there in these years was at war and wakeful. That could cut both ways. Busy eyes sometimes miss a small boat. Hungry lords sometimes welcome skilled men who arrive with coin and craft. Would rebels or hard-pressed kings hide strangers in white mantles? Only if strangers first lay aside the white. Men are not colors. A quartermaster who can cost a convoy, a pilot who reads a bar at night, a clerk who can set a ledger straight, such men are useful in any camp. Later ages tied the temple to Scotland in proud stories. Here we allow only this: a small, quiet landing on a lonely shore is possible, and usefulness buys shelter when heraldry would not. If north was one path, south was another, and the south had patience in it. The Bay of Biscay, so quick to turn angry, also grants strings of calm in autumn. A captain who fears questions more than weather can steal down the Spanish and then the Portuguese coast in tidy steps. He hugs the land. He waits when the sky tells him. He enters the Douro with care or aims for the wide mouth of the Tagus and the harbors of Lisbon, where pilots are clever and documents, if presented with manners, have long memories. Why does Portugal feel like a natural home port? Because the order's houses were strong there and the crown was often pragmatic. Years later, men and goods that had been Templar would continue their work under a new banner, the Order of Christ. That is later, but the habit of practicality was already in the wood. In Lisbon, an officer could fold a white mantle into a chest and present only papers, lineage of goods, and the face of a man who knows how to keep accounts. In Setúbal or Porto, a quieter quay offered the same with fewer eyes. Would the Strait of Gibraltar tempt a captain who wanted blue water and distance? It would tempt and warn. The strait is a throat where the sea breathes fast. Currents push, winds corkscrew, and cliffs make their own tricks. A small ship can slip through in a quiet spell, but no one slips unseen. The headlands watch. On the other side, the western Mediterranean opens like a basin ringed with cities that sell and sail. Valencia, Barcelona, and the islands of Majorca and Ibiza under the crown of Aragon's eye. Does the Mediterranean offer more safety or more attention? It offers both, measured differently. Navigation is easier in its shorter hops. Pilots are everywhere. Ports are close and busy. But that very busyness comes with officials who write fast and keep tidy desks. A new hull in Palma may attract less notice than a new face in a quiet Galician creek, but once noticed, a captain may meet questions asked with a quicker pen. Distance from the French crown is an ally here. Proximity to other powers is not always a friend. Why think of Majorca at all? Because it was a trading hinge, rich in pilots and charts. A man seeking to reweave his life could find shipmates there, maps that knew every cove from Sardinia to the Gulf of Lion, and merchants who smiled at any cargo that arrived on time and asked no questions about yesterday. If papers needed new seals, if coin needed new names, there were desks where such things were done for fees and favors. What about Sicily, that island that holds the middle of the sea like a keystone? Sicily is a crossroads. Northern traders, southern winds, eastern spices, western wool. But crossroad traffic brings news and news brings questions. A Templar crew that reached so far would be skilled and lucky. They might blend in if they split. A few men ashore with letters to old friends, a few sailing on as ordinary mariners. Sicily would not be a first refuge. It would be a place to pass through if the plan kept stretching. And Cyprus, long the order's strong base after the fall of Acre, does it call across the water? It calls with memory and with risk. The distance is long, the route is lined with eyes, the politics are tangled. Templar houses stood on that island as late as the arrests, but to steer for Cyprus from La Rochelle is to ask much of weather, of luck, and of the silence of many ports. A single ship with light cargo and steady wind could make it. A cluster hoping to move coin and charters would be wiser to choose shorter leaps. Could a captain instead choose west by north, to Ireland's softer harbors? Yes. The Irish coast, with inlets like Kinsale and Waterford and river mouths tucked under green hills, offered shelter and trade. English officials had reached there, but not every arm in a kingdom is the same length. A well-chosen cove, a discreet friend inland, and the disappearance becomes a matter of muddy boots rather than oared patrols. How does a ship disappear after landfall? By becoming ordinary. Men shave. Mantles fold away. A captain becomes master only, not brother. The clerk finds a town where his hand is worth a wage. The quartermaster rents a small room near a stable and counts hay with the same care he once counted deniers. If a new order will take them in later, they are ready to be taken. If not, they become what they can do: pilot, scribe, steward, buyer of grain, keeper of keys. Would they split cargoes as well as lives? A wise plan rarely rides on one keel. A chest of coin on one ship and the ledgers that prove claims on another. Relics and charters wrapped in waxed cloth on a third, in case the sea reminds men that it keeps its own counsel. Rendezvous are made not by date, which weather mocks, but by place and season. After Michaelmas, in the yard of the house by the old well. After Epiphany, in the porch of St. Mary's at dusk. What of Aragon's coast, Barcelona and the ports it commands? There the crown of Aragon's sailors thrived. A foreign hull could be taken into the stream of business as easily as a leaf. The danger again is the desk. Officials who speak several languages write 3 and remember faces. But that skill cuts both ways. A man with clean letters and a well-told story can pass here more smoothly than in rougher places. A Templar officer who knew traders from his years of moving wheat and coin would find old acquaintances leaning on railings. Could old friendships save new fugitives? Often more than new oaths do. A merchant who made a profit under the temple's honest keeping may honor the memory of that safety with a quiet favor. Store this for a season, hire that man without questions, stamp this paper later with the right seal. Gratitude is not law. It is something softer and sometimes more enduring. What if the plan was to vanish in stages rather than in a single sprint? Then winter becomes part of the plan. Ships wintered as a matter of prudence, taking months in port to mend and wait for kinder winds. A Templar cargo could winter as well, in a cellar under a merchant's house, in a church loft under lumber, in a sealed chest that becomes part of the landscape of a storeroom until the spring opens the sea again. Vanishing is often slow work. Could men find protection under new names without travel at all? Yes. We should say it plainly, not every brother who evaded arrest went by sea. Some stepped sideways into other houses. Some crossed borders by road with companions who owed them kindness. Some hid in plain sight in towns where they were known for fixing bridges and keeping order. The sea is one road, not the only road. If we had to weigh the roads by likelihood, where would the scale settle? It would settle most softly on Portugal and England, because those routes were short, common, and equipped with houses that could receive men and papers without drama. It would tremble toward Aragon and Majorca for those who had contacts there and the nerve to pass the strait. It would barely tilt toward Sicily and Cyprus except for a few ships and a longer patience. Scotland, by water, is possible but earns its plausibility more from later stories than from the habits of 1307. Ireland asks less of weather and more of friends. Is there room on the scale for the legend's favorite, the far and secret place? There is room in the heart always. But when we fold the map the way a pilot folds a chart, creases more worn where hands pass most, we see the ordinary path glow. Short hops. Known pilots. Papers ready. Wine or grain on top of chests. Landings at dawn in places that see dawn landings every week. The romance shrinks. The realism grows. The story stays human. Do winds and currents choose for men, or do men choose within their weather? Both. A north wind pushes south. A west wind decides whether the strait is a friend or a fight. A captain chooses when to leave and how much risk to allow, but he does not argue with a black line on the horizon. He reads the sky. He hears the long moan that means fetch building far away. He knows when to tuck his ship into the lee and let the plan rest. What travels best when the world is breaking, coin or paper or people? This question lowers like a hook into the next part of our voyage. Coin buys new beginnings. Paper proves old rights. People carry both in their heads. The knowing of a coast, the order of a barn, the trust of a merchant who remembers a fair count. If a Templar quartermaster must choose, he chooses what lets him remake the web. Records that argue for fields and mills, enough coin to keep men fed, and enough men to read the ledgers and row the boat. So where do we leave our imagined hulls now? Anchored for a moment in safe water. A cove in Devon, a bend in the Tagus, a dusty creek behind a Portuguese bar, a quiet quay on Majorca where cats lick fish scales from their paws. On deck, a hooded lantern. Below, chests that do not rattle because good coin and good paper both ride better when wedged and wrapped. On shore, a friend who knows which door opens to a room with no questions. We have walked the roads the sea provides and tried to think like cautious men would think. We have left the trumpet to others and listened for the small sounds that carry farther. The clink of a pilot's fee, the sigh of a rope eased rather than dropped, the scratch of a clerk's hand making a new line in an old book. The legend of a forest of masts under stars is sweet. The human truth of a few careful hulls is sweeter to those who love how things really work. Let the map fold again. Let the names of ports settle back into their places like birds into roosts. Ahead of us is a question quieter than destinations and more telling. Not only where a ship might go, but what it would be wise to take aboard. In the next chapter, we will open the chests without waking the house. We will lay out what treasure meant in that age. Coin, yes, but also parchments, seals, relics, and the small tools that rebuild a life. For now, rest with the gentle shore sound in your ear and the knowledge that roads exist for those who know how to use them. Open a chest in your mind. It is oak, iron banded, smelling of beeswax and ship tar. Inside, something dull and heavy. Something thin and crackling. A glint of worked silver. A pouch that whispers when you lift it. This is the word treasure in 1307. It is not one thing. It is weight, yes, but it is also proof. It is shine and it is script. It is what a man can spend today and what a house can claim tomorrow. What counted as treasure when the night was short and the tide already turning? Start with coin because coin answers fast. Silver deniers and grow toured like small moons. Gold moved more quietly in fewer pieces but with a glow every hand could feel. Coin pays for oars, bread, salt fish, new line, a pilot who need not be told twice. Coin makes strangers easier. Coin is the language a gatekeeper speaks at dawn when he pretends not to see. It is heavy and honest, and it clinks in a way that comforts men whose plans must cross water. Would they risk weight when speed was life? They would, in measured bags. Coin travels best in leather pouches tied in cords and then again inside a chest wedged hard against movement. A quartermaster keeps two measures in mind: what buys a week of food and calm, and what seeds the next season of work. He trims out vanity, no needless silver plate, no showy cups, and chooses round, biteable truth. He knows the test: a cut with a knife, a ring on wood, the feel in the palm. He would sooner throw his cloak overboard than go light on coin. But treasure in that age was more than round metal. It was also shape and symbol: reliquaries, chalices, a sliver of bone in a gilded box, a splinter said to be from a holy beam. Such things were spiritual capital. Pilgrims give when relics rest under a roof they trust. Nobles are softened by saints. A small, portable reliquary can be a shield against rough hands. Not legal proof but moral pause. To take it is to risk a town's whispering anger and a bishop's stare. Which value is safer in a storm, melt value or meaning? A reliquary can be stripped to raw silver, but then it is only metal and a sin. Kept whole, it draws steady offerings and softens doors that coin alone might not open. The choice depends on danger. On a quiet road, the saint stays a saint. In a hard corner, the saint's case may become lifeboat metal. Men live in the gap between vows and weather. Now lift the sheaf that looks like nothing: parchment and paper. A charter sealed with wax is a key to a mill, a stream, a field with a certain hedge, a right to take tolls at a bridge. A papal privilege lets a house keep its income when neighbors grumble. A letter from a count confirms the gift his grandfather made and his father forgot. These thin sheets are the skeleton of an order. Without them, coin is a fire that warms for a night and then is gone. Why guard parchment more than gold? Because parchment multiplies gold. A ledger tells where the rent should arrive. A rent roll reminds a reeve that his measure must be honest. A quittance proves a debt paid so it need not be paid again at someone else's word. A cartulary, a book of copied charters, carries a whole estate between boards. In a dispute, the man with the seal and the good copy wins the afternoon and sometimes the year. Seals themselves are treasure, small, heavy, and quiet. A seal matrix, carved in metal, stamps a house's face into wax. Without it, a charter's words can be doubted. With it, a short letter can move a cart at a town gate as if a whole troop had spoken. The temple kept seals at several levels: the master's grand seal, regional seals, local seals for routine business. A small pouch with 2 or 3 of these, wrapped in cloth, is worth a chest of unproven coin. What happens if a seal is lost or taken? Panic first, then procedure. Word must go out that old wax is no longer to be trusted. A new face must be cut and blessed. Until then, reliance falls back onto witnesses, counter seals, and the slow truth of men who can say, "I saw that charter written." In a night flight, the seal pouch is guarded by a hand and, if need be, teeth. Open the ledger now. The writing is tight, brown-black, and even. Columns carry rents in pennies and measures of grain. Margins hold little marks: a cross when paid, a dot when promised, a circle when delayed. Some leaves list debts owed to the temple by men who wear crowns as well as by men who wear smocks. A royal IOU, safely kept, is risky to wave in one realm and useful to present in another. When empires shrug, paper remembers. Can ink outweigh iron? An armed man can seize a barn for a season. A well-kept ledger can feed a house for years. After any storm, war, seizure, rumor, paper is how a network finds itself again. Who owes whom? Which field belonged to which endowment? Where the miller must send 3 sacks and 6. These are small threads that, woven back, become a cloak against winter. There are other quiet treasuries. Tallies, paired sticks notched to show sums, split so each party keeps a half that matches only one mate in the world. Keys, shaped irons to strong rooms, their teeth rough with use, often kept in pairs on different rings. Codes of habit, cover names that a clerk and a factor share so a letter can say, "the cart with onions," and mean "the box with wax," without a stranger guessing. A few tools, a scraper, a penknife, pumice for smoothing, are humble power. With them, a new ledger grows from a blank like wheat from soil. Could such humble things defeat a king's search? Sometimes, because a king's search looks for glitter and bulk. He posts men at city gates to intercept wagons heavy with chests. He asks after plate and coin. He knows to watch for men in white. He does not always know to watch for a scribe with a bundle of sermons, or a reeve with rent lists rolled in cloth. The smallest treasuries are most invisible when they look like work. Consider also claims, that odd class of treasure that weighs nothing and moves everything. A claim is a right to collect next year's income from a given meadow, or to draw arrears from a negligent tenant, or to receive repayment from a prince who borrowed last spring. Claims do not shine. They are ink. Yet a house that holds them can rebuild barns that burned and buy seed for fields that must not lie fallow. In a rupture, saving claims is saving years. But do claims survive when the great say otherwise? They do when witnesses live, when copies exist in several hands, when seals match, when neighbors prefer order to confusion. After the temple fell, much of its property was meant to pass to another order. Where a claim was clear, the stream kept flowing with a new name on its bank. Where it was not, men argued. And the man with the better paper and the calmer clerk often won. Think of trade goods as a different sort of purse. Wool, salt, wine, iron. These turn into cash wherever ships make lines on water. A ship that carries ordinary cargo can hide extraordinary value under it. A barrel of salted fish can cover coin. A bale of cloth can cradle a packet of charters tied in waxed twine. A manifest that lists staples pulls no eyes. The quartermaster's real manifest lives in his head and under his thumb. Do ordinary goods make the best disguise? Yes, because they ask for no story. Men do not gather to gossip about sacks of rye. Barrels do not blush. A captain who loads what every captain loads becomes the shape that the harbor expects to see. Only the weight in the stern will whisper a different tale, and only to feet that know a hull's balance. Now count the people, because people are treasure. A pilot who can taste a bar with a lead line. A clerk who can reconstruct a rent roll from memory. A quartermaster who can provision a month on half a budget without losing a day. A chaplain who calms men whose fear would ruin stealth. A factor in a foreign port who trusts a face and not a letter. Each such person carries, in his bones and habits, value that no chest can equal. Is a skilled clerk the rarest coin of all? At the right hour, yes. He is the man who can, with good ink in a quiet corner, regrow a garden from seeds saved in the hem of a coat. He knows which abbey holds a copy of the charter your enemies say never existed. He remembers that the mill on the small river near the oak was confirmed twice in the same year, once by a count who died in harvest and once by his brother. His mind is a second archive. If the night were short, how would a house pack? They would triage. First the seal pouch, then the packet of cartularies and key charters, then the current ledgers and rent rolls, then a bag of coin sized for 2 fortnights of calm. After that, a small reliquary if one lies near to hand and can travel without scandal. Personal clothes count last, vows promised plainness. A cloak warms whether it is yours or your brother's. A charter must be that charter or all is lost. How would they keep loss from being ruined? By splitting treasure into cousins. Duplicate copies of key charters ride in different hands or on different keels. Ledgers are summarized into notebooks that a scribe can hide under his tunic. Coin is divided, one chest to the ship, another to a cart aimed inland, a third to a trusted merchant who will meet in a city 2 months hence. A small cache may even be buried in a stable floor under loose plank and straw, a map drawn in a code only 2 men can read. Why not bury everything until storms pass? Because buried goods do not pay pilots or feed crews. Because the future is never a given date but a moving tide. Because men with shovels grow curious when they see disturbed earth. Because a treasure saved but unable to move is a winter with no seed corn. The art is balance. Enough hidden to rebuild if seized, enough at hand to act if spared. Follow the parcels ashore once a safe harbor is found. Papers go first to a friendly desk, an abbey's chest, a notary's cupboard, the back room of a merchant who remembers fair dealing. Coin moves only as needed and never all at once. The seal pouch sleeps under a priest's care. The clerk copies key pages again in a new book with a new hand but the same truth. The quartermaster becomes a buyer of oats with a new name and an old caution. What gets presented first in a new town? The saint, the seal, or the silver? Often the seal because it speaks to officials. Sometimes the saint because it speaks to hearts. The silver stays quiet until the first 2 have done their work. A whisper in the right ear, "We will repair your bridge if you hold this box for a season," can turn suspicion into partnership. A loan to a shipmaster at fair interest can buy a friendship that outlasts a rumor. There is, too, the patience of claims ripening. A charter shown to a new lord who wants a steady realm can become tomorrow's rent even if today's rents were seized. A ledger presented with humility can persuade a cautious bishop to say, "Yes, keep the mill running, we will sort ownership later." In times of upheaval, people choose continuation over cleverness more often than ballads admit. All of this sits under a plain truth. Treasure is a system that remembers. Coin remembers the next hour. Paper remembers the next year. Relics remember the next visit. Seals remember the trust that makes small words move heavy doors. People remember how to make the other 3 work. Together they are not a dragon horde. They are a loom and the order wove with them. If the legend loves a secret chest in a dark hold, we can let it keep that picture as a candle. But beside it, place the quieter light of a wrapped bundle of charters, the soft clack of a seal in a palm, the patient scratch of a pen on a fresh leaf. Those sounds, not just the clink of coin, are the music of survival. Let the chest lid fall softly now. The iron rings settle. The room grows still. Outside, the tide makes its long breath against the quay. In the next chapter we will listen to voices instead of objects. The men pressed in chambers, the questions asked, the words forced and then retracted. We will ask how fear can twist a story and how careful reading untwists it. For tonight, hold the knowledge that treasure is not only what shines. Sometimes it is what rustles, what stamps, what remembers, and what keeps a promise in the dark. The room is small and close. The window is more slit than view. A candle leans in its own heat. On the wall, light trembles over stone as if the stone were breathing. A table stands between two men. On one side, a clerk with a pen already wet. On the other, a brother of the temple with hands that remember rains and rosaries. Outside, a bell counts an hour that means nothing in here. Inside, time is measured by questions. Why do we begin in a room this quiet? Because the legend loves the harbor at night, but the record was made in rooms like this, low, warm with bodies, close with fear. In these rooms, voices were pressed into words that became pages, and pages became judgments. Here we can watch how stories change when pain enters the sentence and when hope, small as a crumb, is offered for the price of agreeing. What did questioning mean in that world? At first, it meant formal words in a steady order. A judge or royal officer asked, a notary wrote, and the brother answered while swearing to tell the truth. But when the answers did not satisfy, the mood shifted. In many places, men were shown tools that were not tools for carpentry. Cords, pulleys, frames for stretching, irons that could wait in coals. They were told that the questions would return in a different voice. They were told that truth had to be a pain that could be weighed. How does fear shape a sentence? It shortens it. A man who has prayed in quiet voices now measures syllables like a diver measures breath. He tries to find the words that will end this hour. He listens for the shape of what is wanted, the pattern in the questions that leads him toward the answer that the questioner already half believes. He learns quickly that no is heavy and yes is light, and light things float toward the door. But what were the answers the rooms seemed to want? They wanted a pattern to prove a plan. They asked if an initiation involved shame. A kiss where a kiss should not be, a spit on a cross, a denial of Christ to test obedience. They asked if the brothers worshipped a head or an image or an idol with strange powers. They asked if the order taught forgiveness without priests, as if a marshal's word could erase sin. They asked for a secret that would make the temple's strength into something wicked instead of something organized. Could such things have lived in plain houses without earlier witness? This is the line we must walk with care. Large bodies collect failings. Men sin in every habit. But these charges had a theatrical sameness that often fits the needs of accusers better than the lives of the accused. The details echoed from town to town as if carried not by memory but by the leading edge of the very questions themselves. When a man under rope is asked, "Did you spit upon the cross at your entry?" the denial must be iron to hold. What did the notary do while the rope creaked? He wrote in a clean hand the words that would be read later in calmer rooms. He wrote phrases that sound in Latin or French, like cool water spilled on hot stone, freely and spontaneously, without force or fear. Sometimes those words were written even on days when force and fear sat on the bench like extra judges. Sometimes the writing was more honest and admitted that the pain had come first and the words had followed. In either case, the page looks calm. That is the cruelty of ink. If pain forces words, why did some men still refuse? Because vows can stiffen a spine. Because a quiet stubbornness lives in people who have kept to a rule for years. Some brothers spoke little and suffered much. Some held to no. Some kept silence like a shield. Not all rooms broke all men. And in later hearings, under church commissions that forbade torture or kept it far, old yes changed to new no, as if the same mouth at last found its true shape. What happens to truth when rooms disagree? It becomes a river that splits around stones. Royal officers produced stacks of confessions that ran together like reeds. Church judges, moving slower, collected retractions and pleas for forgiveness and reform. The Pope's envoys met high officers and heard complex answers. Admission of faults the order could have corrected, denial of monstrous charges that seemed like stage directions borrowed from other trials. The same men who bent in one house stood straighter in another. Which house do we trust? The one with less rope. How does a roomer learn to walk? It borrows boots. In markets and taverns, People tested each new thing they had heard about the temple against old envy, old gratitude, old boredom. The story that shocks best travels farthest. They spat on a cross, said a man who had never been in a chapter house and never would be. They had a head, said another, and a potter's kiln warmed the picture in his mind until it hardened into something he could describe over wine. The rumor did not need proof. It needed repetition. There was talk of an idol, where was it found? On paper, everywhere, on tables, almost nowhere. The head changed faces across regions. In one telling it was like a human face, in another a cat's, in a third, a thing that is more word than object. Scribes drew no pictures. Officers produced no trophies. Courts kept no item that could be paraded through a square to end debate. The charge kept its power by being shapeless. The less the object, the larger the shadow. Did translation twist meaning? Latin, French, Occitan, Catalan, words crossed borders with the men who used them. A reverence toward a senior at entry could be turned by a hostile ear into a kiss against decency. A renunciation of the world, could, when pressed, become the denial of Christ in a clumsy mouth trying to satisfy the form without betraying the faith. Clerks who loved exact words sometimes worked beside officers who wanted large ones. What about the brothers who confessed and never recanted? Their pages remain. Some, under pain or on the promise of mercy, told full stories and kept them across years. People do not all carry fear the same way. Some could not bear another day in irons and chose words that would open air. Some were ashamed of their earlier yes, and could not face a new no. Some did sin in private, the small sins that every house knows, and folded those into the large ones to end the chapter. We can pity without agreeing. How did the pattern spread beyond France? Letters moved. Kings asked each other, "What have you done with the temple?" and compared answers like ledgers. Papal orders opened church courts across realms. In some places the royal grip was looser, the judges more careful, the public less eager to believe the worst. Results varied like weather. But the first blow struck in France had set the key. Music written for one king's chamber was now being played in other halls. Why did repetition make the charges stronger to some ears? Because people trust echoes. If 3 towns report the same shape of sin, it feels like proof, even if the shape came from the same prompting questions asked in the same order with the same threats behind them. Judges weary of complexity crave patterns that let them move a crowded docket. As elsewhere, so here, is a seductive sentence when your table holds stacks of cases and your lamps are low. Was there any room inside the church for mercy? There was, and it was used, unevenly, imperfectly, but it was used. Some brothers received absolution and light penance for words spoken under fear. Some houses were told to correct customs and report to new superiors. Some bishops urged that the order be mended, not ended. The papal commissions that listened softly tried in that way to rescue a soul from a machine. But machines built of crown and rumor and ledger do not stop easily once they have found their pace. Where were the women in these stories? In the margins where wisdom often waits. Sisters, mothers, and neighbors remembered the small, faithful things the brothers had done. A bridge mended, bread given, a path kept safe. Their voices did not carry into chancelleries, but they carried in lanes and markets. Memory is another kind of testimony. It seldom enters a formal record, but it shapes the tone of a town for a long time. Did any judge doubt the neatness of the pile? Yes. Skepticism is an old craft. Some churchmen pressed for physical proof and were not satisfied with words alone. Some demanded to see the alleged idols and grew quiet when none were produced. Some recorded, in careful notes, that the same phrasing appeared like a watermark in confessions taken miles apart by different hands. Doubt survived even while the process rolled onward. What does pain do to time? It lengthens moments and shortens memory. A man under strain reaches for the pattern the questioner wants because it ends the now. Later, when the rope is gone and the candle burns lower, he may not remember which part was his belief and which part was the room's desire. This is the deep unfairness of confessions under pressure. They use a man's wish to leave the hour against the truth of his life. If the words were bent, how do we unbend them? Gently. We look for the places where they change when conditions change. We weigh retractions taken without threat more heavily than admissions taken with it. We count how often a detail appears in the mouth of a questioner before it appears in the mouth of the questioned. We notice the absence of objects when objects are easy to keep. We refuse to let a single page under a single seal tell us how thousands of days were lived. What happened to men who recanted? Some paid with their lives when politics wanted examples. Some were imprisoned long and then released into a world that had shifted under their feet. Some were folded into other orders under new names. A few high officers became symbols because symbols are useful to endings. The burnings people remember came late, when patience had thinned and theater served a purpose. The earlier hours were quieter, and their cruelty was paperwork. Is it possible that both small fault and large innocence lived in the same house? It is more than possible, it is likely. Human bodies gather stains. An order that large would harbor zeal and laziness, faith and formality, generosity and pettiness. A fair reading allows for correction without destruction. A political reading seeks a verdict that empties barns into the right hands. The record keeps both kinds of reading mixed, and our task is to sort them without pretending a purity that the past never had. How did the pattern end? Not with a single gavel, but with a council's long sentences. The Pope, pulled by kings and by the Church's own need for steadiness, dissolved the order not with a clean judgment of proven heresy everywhere, but with a judgment that the order could not be trusted to continue as it was. Property was to pass to the Hospitallers. Men were to be handled case by case, gently in theory, unevenly in practice. The machine slowed and creaked to a stop over years, not days. What remained when the rooms emptied? The pages remained, and the habits the pages could not erase. The knowledge of how to run an estate. The skill of reading a coast. The friendships built over ledgers and bread. These are the things that survive accusatory fashions. They move from cloak to cloak, badge to badge. They are patient. Institutions fall. Competence walks out by a side door and goes back to work. If pain and rumor wrote much of this chapter, what lesson do we carry forward? That a careful ear is gentler than a loud one. That pressure makes patterns that look like proof but are only pressure. That dull records can be merciful because they show the everyday that grand lies cannot swallow whole. That truth, when allowed time and light, is often smaller than myth and more durable. That the men we have been following were not angels or monsters, but workers in vows who met estates need dressed as righteousness. Let the candle lean lower now. The clerk wipes his pen and lays a sanded page aside to dry. The brother, unbound for the night, lies on a bench and counts breaths, not because he is measuring a plan, but because sleep is a door he can still open himself. Outside, the bell gives the hour again. It sounds like a long road that can still be walked. In the next chapter, we will leave the small room and go out into the larger world the rooms reshaped. We will watch what came after the fall. How other hands took the keys, how goods and habits moved into new houses, how in Portugal a new name, Order of Christ, kept old work alive. The tide of rumor has rolled. What remains are barns, boats, ledgers, and the quiet stubbornness of men who know how to keep them. Rest a moment. The doors ahead open onto daylight. Morning comes to places that slept through rumors. A miller ties back his sleeve. A reeve unlocks a barn. The bell in a parish tower counts the hour and the men in the yard count sacks of rye. The white mantle is gone from the doorway, but the door still opens and a ledger still lies on the table. The world has not ended, it has changed hands. What happens to a house when a key moves from one ring to another? First there is counting. Royal officers, bishops' men, and, soon enough, receivers for another order stand where Templars once stood and read rooms with their eyes. A list is made. A seal is pressed. The horse that was the temples becomes held in trust. The field that wore one name wears another. And yet the wheat in it remains the same wheat, needing weather and patience more than banners. Does work pause when names change? Not for long. Harvests ignore politics. Ovens want fuel and flour whether a king smiles or scowls. In many places, the same local people who serve the temple, sergeants, clerks, reeves, carters, keep doing their tasks while letters move between far-off desks. A mantle can be folded in a chest in a single afternoon. A system takes longer to fold, and sometimes it isn't folded at all. It is retitled. Across Christendom, the official plan hardens on parchment. The order of the temple will be dissolved and most of its property will pass to another military order, the Hospital of St. John. The words are careful. The intent is clear. But the road between intent and arrival is not a straight line. Crowns hesitate, neighbors take advantage, and the very abundance of the temple's holdings slows their flow. If the law says to the Hospitallers, why do we need patience? Because paper travels at the pace of horses and habits. Some kings hold what they have taken for a season and then another, saying they will transfer it soon. Some bishops insist on a local accounting first. Some towns argue that a bridge the temple built is really the town's by ancient right. Who decides? Letters do, eventually, papal letters, royal letters, letters from priories, and these letters pile like snow, each flake small, the drift deep. Look at France, where the blow first fell. Great houses are inventoried, sealed, and, on paper, destined for the Hospitallers. In practice, the crown's hand lingers. The strong compound in Paris that people simply call the Temple becomes a royal place, a treasury, a symbol of the state's reach. Provincial estates move but slowly, and some never move all the way. Officers argue about rents from a mill, fees at a ferry, even the right to bury in a chapel's yard. The old routine continues with new signatures below it. But did the brothers themselves simply vanish? No. Men do not dissolve the way institutions do. Some former Templars find themselves quietly pensioned, their vows loosened by authority and their bread assured by a parish. Some, especially clerics, move into service under bishops. A few are allowed to pass into the hospital, where their habits of discipline fit without creaking. Others go home to families they left young, arriving like a winter visitor who must learn how to sit again at a hearth he barely remembers. Who kept the ledgers moving while the world argued. Often the same hands. A Templar clerk who had set down rents for years now copies them for a hospitaller receiver. The ink is as brown, the letters as neat. He knows which tenant pays late every spring and which miller measures with a heavy thumb. That knowledge matters more than the color of the cross on the wall. Continuity hides in plain sight, in small competence that survives large change. Turn the map west and south to Portugal. There, the crown is practical and looks beyond the fight to the field. What cannot be saved under one name might be saved under another. In time, a new order takes root, the Order of Christ, born with approval from Rome, shaped to receive Templar goods and men without reopening old wounds. The cross changes, the rule is trimmed and sewn anew, and work resumes. Estates tended, roads watched, ships provisioned. Why did this Portuguese solution hold? Because it solved several problems at once. It honored papal authority by keeping goods in vowed hands, soothed local needs by keeping trusted managers in place, and allowed a king to maintain strength along his frontiers and coasts. The men who knew how to run barns, count coin, and read tides were too valuable to discard. A fresh name gave the public a way to accept continuity without arguing old cases forever. Did anything of the sea survive in that new cloth? More than a little. In the decades to come, that red cross of the new order would ride on sails as Portuguese ships looked down the coast of Africa and then farther. The link from a counting yard in 1307 to a caravel's deck in later centuries is not magic. It is management, memory, and money, kept in vowed hands and put to work by men who organized as naturally as they breathed. We must not draw a straight line where history drew a rope with knots, but we can say, practices survived and practices matter. In the crown of Aragon, east of Iberia's spine, a different shape appears. To keep Templar houses useful and to avoid handing everything to a foreign rival, a new local order is created, Montesa, set to inherit what the Temple had held. The strategy mirrors Portugal's: change the coat, keep the body working. Elsewhere in Iberia, some houses fold into existing orders like Calatrava or Santiago. Again, continuity wears a new badge. Why did kingdoms prefer continuity with a fresh name to tearing down and starting over? Because starting over is expensive. It wastes knowledge and invites disorder. A new order that looks familiar from the porch offers both change enough for public peace and sameness enough for practical life. Relics find new niches, barns keep their locks, tenants keep their fields, and the crown keeps a network that can mobilize resources in a pinch. Cross the channel to England, where things moved more slowly and with less heat. Arrests there were real, but the machinery of condemnation ground with a gentler tooth. Many brothers were examined without the rack and sent to houses to live out their days. Templar lands and houses, after argument, drifted toward the Hospitallers. A few, inevitably, stuck to local hands until more letters arrived. Even in a calmer realm, change is a long road. What did a former Templar's day look like once the storm passed? It looked more like yesterday than he expected. Rising at a familiar hour. Eating simple food. Work, prayer, small routines. If he had been allowed to move into the hospital, his duties resembled what he knew: care of travelers, management of estates, defense where defense was needed. If he was pensioned or secularized, he might serve as a steward to a lord who valued discipline, or as a factor to a merchant who admired a tidy account. Vows shape a man's habits. When vows loosen, the habits often remain. And the ships, did they find new flags as the barns found new locks? They did, or they were sold, or they were simply called by plainer names. A cog does not care whose seal sits in the chest below. It wants rope tarred on time and a helm that listens. In ports where the Temple once hired pilots and bought grain, Hospitallers or merchants or local orders began to do the same. A few masters who had worked for the Temple now worked for other pay. Tide tables kept their counsel, human calendars changed. Some places, though, were wounded beyond easy repair. There were houses whose brothers died in prison or at a stake, estates whose claims were so tangled that fields lay fallow for seasons while ink argued with ink. These are the quiet costs that legends skip. Every year a field rests unwillingly is a year a village tightens its belt. If so much continued, why does the story feel like an ending? Because endings fit minds more easily than survivals. A dramatic fall satisfies our appetite for turning points. The truth is softer. A change of headings on ledgers, a change of uniforms on men who already knew what to do, a change of seals that kept the same carts moving to the same bridges at the same time. Human lives need stories. Systems need only people who show up. Did anyone profit by holding on too long? Yes. Some officers skimmed. Some neighbors expanded fences when no one was looking. Some petty lords discovered old rights they had never mentioned before. Even saints' bones were not immune to strategic travel. But against that, set the thousands of plain transactions that kept going. Wheat weighed. Rents collected. Roofs repaired. The past did not break, it flexed. What of the Pope who had tried to balance law and peace? He saw the council's work done and the bulls issued, and then the world did what it always does with decrees. Obeyed some, delayed some, argued some, and ignored a few. Church commissions oversaw transfers, confirmed pensions, and tried to keep local powers honest. Success varied by distance from the nearest firm hand and by the honesty of the men on the spot. Even the best law travels with a limp. Among former brothers, what stayed when rank and uniform fell away? A way of keeping time. A way of reading people. A way of tending things that do not shout for attention until they fail. Roofs, wheels, hinges, lines. These crafts found homes. A chaplain became a parish priest. A marshal became a stable master on a great estate. A quartermaster became a city's grain buyer. A clerk became the quiet spine in a bishop's office. The order had formed men. The world had worked for formed men. Were there places where former Templars were welcomed as a kind of insurance? Quietly, yes. A lord with enemies likes a steward who can fortify a tower without fuss. A port with ambitions likes a buyer who can stock a voyage. An abbey with wide lands likes a manager who can read a rent roll as if it were music. Grudges against the temple did not always extend to the people who had made the temple function. Memory, close to the ground, is better at nuance than proclamations are. The longer shadow of this aftermath stretches farther than barns. In Portugal, as we noted, a reseated tradition would help launch ventures along difficult coasts. Elsewhere, the vesting of the temple's goods into the hospital strengthened that order's reach and responsibilities, tying it even more to the practical business of care and defense. The world the Templars had helped to organize remained organized, just not in their name. But if continuity was the rule, where do the great myths of disappearance and secret survival come from? From the same human spring that loves the idea of a silent harbor escape. People prefer hidden threads to visible ropes. They like to imagine a brotherhood living on in perfect secrecy, shaping crowns and vaults from shadows. It is sweeter to think the temple went underground than to admit it mostly went into the next office, the next field, the next ship, the next rule under a different seal. Does that make the myths worthless? No. It makes them signals, not sources. They tell us what listeners wanted. A rescue for their favorite story, a sense that justice could outweigh power, a hint that competence always finds a way. Our task, gentle and steady, is to hold the human wish in one hand and the human paperwork in the other and to see where they overlap without forcing them to be the same. By now, the day that began with the miller tying back his sleeve has gone to dusk. The barn is locked. The ledger, new title on its first page, rests under a key. A former brother sits on a low stool mending a strap with hands that have done it for 20 years. He does not speak of councils or bulls. He watches his thread and knits one more small piece of order into a world that is always in need of such work. In the next chapter, we will step out of these steady rooms and walk into the long shadow cast by the temple onto later centuries. Tales told at battlefields like Bannockburn, whispers in lodges, rumors of vaults under alpine stones. We will listen without scoffing and test without craving spectacle. For tonight, breathe with the simple rhythm that carried the order past its end. Count, mend, sow, sail, pray, sleep. The story continues, but more softly now. Even after doors were locked and seals were changed, the story did not fold itself away. It walked out of counting rooms and into halls where songs were sung. It took on new clothes, tartan and lodge apron, alpine coat and banker's cloak. The temple, which had lived by habit and ledger, became a lantern people could carry into their favorite corners of the past and say, "Look, this is where the hidden light came from." Why do fallen orders grow taller in memory than they stood in life? Begin on a June field in 1314, Bannockburn, when dew lay on grass and the day's heat rose like a hand from the earth. Scotland's King Robert Bruce stood with men who were tired and thin and determined. English banners crowded the horizon. Later tellers placed among the Scots a sudden company of horse, bold and clean, their discipline like a blade's edge. Some said they were Templars who had fled the French storm and found at last a field to stand on. It is a satisfying picture. White mantles turned to simple tunics, vows carried in silence, a last charge for a cause that felt just. But what do the oldest voices say? They do not name the temple. They speak of Scots on foot behind a hedge of spears, of a king who chose ground that shaped the fight, of a priest lifting a relic and walking the lines to steady hearts. Chroniclers near the time note bravery and blunders, mud and fear, but not a band of foreign knights arriving like a lost chord. The first firm link between Bannockburn and the temple rises in later centuries, when romance tilts its face toward need. If no early page sings their name there, why does the tune linger? Because stories look for places to land. The temple's fall cried out for a coda that was not only ledgers closing and barns relabeled. A desperate ride at dawn is easier to hum than a court's long sentence. It also flatters the idea that good men, pressed unfairly, will find the exact field where they can do one clean thing that redeems a wound. Hope prefers trumpets to tidying. How might the truth be smaller and still kind? There were Templar lands in Scotland before the fall, and after dissolution many passed to the Hospitallers. Some men stayed on as managers under new seals. Knights trained in the temple's habits would have been useful to any lord who could pay or protect them. A few may, without song, have drilled men in the months before the battle, set a line straight, or taught the quiet art of holding a shield where it saves a life. Invisible help is still help. Turn the lantern from battlefield to lodge. In the 1700s, a famous speech, the kind that polishes genealogy to a shine, told Freemasons they stood in a noble line that reached back through Crusader halls to the temple. New degrees sprouted with Templar names. In Germany, a fashion called the strict observance promised secret superiors from the order's ruins. In France, rites layered Crusader legends over craft charity. Men in good coats liked the thought that their moral work was also historic duty, that their aprons were sewn from old banners. But did lodges inherit the temple's bones, or only its language? Mostly its language. Freemasonry grew from guild customs, civic sociability, and Enlightenment taste. Its Templar branches were ornaments added later, meaningful as symbols, not as charters pulled from a medieval chest. The temple had captains and barns. Masonry had toasts and rules for kindness. One managed ships, the other managed rooms. The bridge between them was imagination, and imagination can be an honest tool when it says what it is. Why did the temple make such a good symbol for men who cared about honor? Because it offered discipline without pettiness in their minds, courage without swagger, charity without display. To place that emblem on a lodge's degree was to promise hospitality, order, and a self kept clean. Symbols need not be literal to be useful. They need only point the heart toward a way of living that makes a town gentler to walk in. Now walk south and east to a valley with a shard of a chapel, carved stone, arches like cupped hands, Rochelle. In the 1400s, a lord built here something small and richly worked. Centuries later, people peered at the stone and saw vines that looked like plants from far shores, columns that seemed to carry a code, and in the dust, traces of Templar survival. The story flowered. Hidden vaults, ships under cover of new names, secrets folded into masonry like herbs into bread. Does the stone speak Templar? It speaks devotion and craft. The carvings are a mason's music, lilted with local taste and wide rumor. The chapel is a 15th century work, born well after the order fell, raised by hands that loved pattern and light. If any memory of the temple lived here, it lived as legend told in the builder's hall, not as a living rule kept by men in white. The wish for a secret is itself a kind of prayer. In Rochelle, the visible beauty is enough. Turn again, this time to mountains and banks. Another long shadow says the temple did not only keep coin, it invented banking as we know it, and when it died, the art walked over the passes to a people who would grow famous for vaults and quiet. Here the facts frown gently. The order did move money across distance with skill. It tallied, trusted, and checked. Yet the Swiss towns that later kept Europe's paper safe grew from different soil. Local leagues, sturdy militias, thick habits of self-rule. Their banking took centuries to bloom and wore the law of its own time, not a borrowed vow. If the dates do not match, why does the link feel neat? Because it lets the mind answer two questions at once. Where did the temple's competence go, and why do some alpine banks feel monastic in their reserve? Neatness is not truth's only test. The long slope from medieval chess to modern ledger has many landings. Skills survive by being useful, and useful things spread without needing one single carrier with a red cross on his cloak. Here is another small echo people like to press into a coin. The idea that Friday the 13th is unlucky because that was the morning the king's men knocked on temple doors. The arrest did fall on a Friday and it was the 13th of October. But fear of Fridays and unease with the number 13 walked in Europe long before anyone stamped them together. The fusion into a single superstition ripened much later, when pamphlets and novels stitched past and present for a thrill. Do such late stitches matter? They matter as weather, not as masonry. They show how a true date can become a hook for a wider mood. They remind us that people like to pin big feelings to small numbers, to tame chance with patterns. None of this changes the history we have read. It changes how that history is remembered when the page closes and the talk begins. Not all long shadows are tender. Some are sharp with theory. In bad hours, people have drawn lines from the temple to plots behind doors and then used those lines to hate their neighbors. This is the darkest misuse of a vanished order, to turn a real community of prayer and work into a mask for suspicions that harm the living. It is an old habit of fear to dress itself in old names. How do we sort symbols that warm from symbols that burn? By asking what they make us do. If a symbol sends us to mend a bridge or visit a sick house or keep a promise, we can keep it close and be grateful. If a symbol sends us to scowl at strangers, to believe a rumor that lets us despise, we can set it down gently and walk away. The temple's best long shadow is not a whisper about secrets. It is a nudge toward steadiness. There are modern revivals that wear the Templar name with open eyes, fraternal groups and charitable orders that march in parades, fund shelters, and keep memorials for the fallen. They do not claim to be the literal continuation of the medieval order. They claim to honor its virtues. That frankness is healthy. It lets history be history and lets homage be honest work in the present. What, then, do we do with Bannockburn tales, lodge myths, mountebank theories, chapel whispers? We listen, we smile, we test. We keep what feeds patience and skill. We compost what feeds pride and contempt. We let romance be romance, useful as a lullaby is useful, not as a plan, but as a comfort that can lead the mind toward rest and the will toward small kindness the next day. There is also the quieter legacy that seldom takes the stage. It lives wherever a steward takes a long view, or a captain respects a tide table, or a clerk copies a ledger without vanity. These are not Templar in any formal way. They are human habits the order practiced well and that many have practiced before and since. The long shadow here is simply competence's shadow. Could this be the true secret people are trying to touch? Perhaps. That steadiness can be learned. That discipline can be gentle. That vows, whether spoken in a chapel or written into a personal rule, can save a life from drift. To say Templar in a lodge or a novel or a family story may be a way to say, I want to belong to something that expects the best from me, and I want that expectation to be old and tested. That is a good wish. It does not need armor to be noble. And what of treasure, the favorite of long shadows? Treasures in stories lift lids and never run out. Treasures in life are spent on people and repaired roofs and a night of peace in a house that was loud with fear last week. If anything of the temple's coin and paper did find new homes across water or border, its best use was simple: to keep skills alive until a rule could be bent into a new name and a barn door could swing on a new hinge. The legend of vaults under snow is sweet. The truth of seed corn bought in time is sweeter. We end this chapter where the long shadow is kindest, on a street lit by evening. A lodge door opens and lets out voices that were speaking of charity. A banker locks a desk where a letter about a small loan will help a neighbor open a shop. A historian closes a book and decides to check a footnote again before making a claim. None of these people needs the temple to justify their decency. Yet the old name, spoken carefully, can remind them that patience and order are ancient friends. So we hold the shadow up and turn it in our hands. From some angles it is only a shape for yearning. From others it is a simple guide. Do your work quietly, keep faith with those you serve, be brave without noise. The louder myths can rest now. We have tested them without sneering. We have found in them not a map, but a mood. In our final chapter, we will slow the pace and let the harbor and the archive speak together. We will ask what this story, ships rumored at night, rooms heavy with questions, ledgers that outlast storms, can teach a modern heart about calm and care. We will end where good sleep begins, with a small promise kept. Close your eyes a moment. The tide is making its long breath again, and the road ahead is soft. The lamp is small and the room is quiet. One page lies open on the table. You can hear a soft draft move along the floor, lifting the edge of the parchment like a breath. Outside, the harbor is only a shape. Inside, the letters are steady. The night is kind to patient work. What do we keep when all the loud parts of a story are done? We keep the simple rhythm we have learned to trust. The tide, the ledger, the human voice that tries to tell the truth without hurry. In our long walk together, we stood on the quay and listened for ropes and water. We watched a city wake to arrests. We read the dull, merciful pages that show how the world really changes hands. We touched the chest that held coin, seal, and script. We listened in the close rooms where fear bent words and where later calm unbent them. We followed the drift of habits into new names. We weighed legends in a light that was kind but not credulous. Now we set the pieces down and let them settle. But what if vanished was never the right verb? Ships slip away, systems endure. A handful of hulls may have moved in the night. The order itself did not sail. It was unstitched and resewn, its cloth cut into coats for other shoulders, Hospitallers, Montesa, the Order of Christ, and for many ordinary men who carried their skills quietly into the next job. The romance of a fleet leaving at once is sweet. The truth of competence finding the next doorway is sweeter. What does this story ask us to admire? Not only the brave charge or the sudden escape, but the long courage of keeping order when the hour is hard. It asks us to see treasure the way a steward sees it. Coin to buy time, paper to buy tomorrow, people to make the other two matter. It asks us to honor the clerk who copies a charter correctly and the pilot who knows where the channel runs this year and the quartermaster who never lets a rope go to sleep dry. But how do we carry that into our own rooms? We keep a small ledger of promises we actually mean to keep. We learn the tides of our work, the hours when we can cross a bar and the hours when we must wait in a quiet bend. We build a habit of checking the knot, listening to the weather, and counting calmly before we speak loudly. We make copies of what matters and we set them in safe places. We treat seals, whatever carries our trust, as if they were heavy and alive. Is it naive to prefer steady truth to spectacular rumor? It is not. It is a practice. The harbor taught us how to test a tale. Look for the tide window, the pilot, the number of hands that would be needed, the room where a page would exist if the act had truly happened. We can carry that habit into any new mystery. Let a story be beautiful if it wants to be, then let it earn its place by touching the world's edges with real fingers. What of the men who suffered? We do not fold them into moral furniture. We remember that ordinary vows met extraordinary pressure and that many broke where many would break. We set sternness aside long enough to acknowledge fear and long enough to honor any man who told the quiet truth when pain asked for a louder lie. We also remember how institutions can be used, how a crown's need dressed itself in piety and how a church's caution was pulled by politics. Memory is not an indictment only, it is a guardrail. But where does the legend land if not in proof? It lands in the part of us that wants justice to outweak greed and wants skill to find a road when doors are shut. That wish is not foolish. It needs companions, patience, evidence, context. Together, they make a better lullaby than spectacle does. A harbor at night is still lovely even if no parade of masts crossed it. A page is still brave even if it lists grain and not miracles. What stays with you from La Rochelle? Maybe the pilot's quiet verbs, keep ease, hold, pass. Maybe the sound of a lead line coming up gritty or clean. Maybe the image of a lamp over a desk where a seal is wrapped in cloth and slipped into a pouch. Maybe the ordinary talk of men who know each other's strengths and call on them without ceremony. These are the small, durable things a legend tries to borrow. They do not mind being lent. And from the counting rooms? The kindness of boredom. The way an inventory, made to be dull, can rescue us from our own hunger for the amazing. 2 tables. 6 benches. 3 iron pans. A chest sealed. Here truth is worn like a work shirt. It fits and it does not care to be admired. It simply does its job, which is to hold the day still long enough for fairness to see it. What did the long shadow teach? That symbols are tools and we should notice what they make us do. If a Templar cross in a lodge reminds someone to spend time and coin on shelter for a neighbor, let it shine. If a Templar rumor tempts someone to hate in the dark, set it down. We learn to sort warmth from heat. We learn to take comfort from continuity and not to mistake changing names for vanished work. But why does this story make good sleep? Because it lets the world be both mysterious and decent. The sea keeps some secrets, people keep some promises. We do not have to choose between wonder and order. We can drift on the sound of the tide and rest in the knowledge that barns are locked, ledgers balanced, sails furled correctly, and a pilot somewhere knows a channel we will need tomorrow. The mind can lower its guard when habit keeps watch. Where do we say goodbye to the white mantle? On a hook by a door that leads to morning. The cloth is quiet now. The men who wore it have other coats, other rooms, other rules, and yet the same hands. A strap is mended. A key is turned. A page is set to dry. The sea is there if needed, patient and without vanity. The shore is there with its work, honest and repeating. And we are here, softer in our breath, listening to a story that ended without loudness and left the world better organized for having passed through it. Shall we let the harbor speak once more? Hear the creak of a fender against stone. Hear a gull make a single note as if testing the air. Feel the slow lift as the tide turns. A lantern moves, then stops, then moves again. Somewhere, a pilot smiles at the feel of the line in his hand. Somewhere, a clerk ties a ribbon around a packet of papers and writes a plain label in a neat hand. Somewhere, a quartermaster counts loaves with a thumb that knows the weight by heart. These are the ships and the chests and the treasures that sleep well and let us sleep as well. What promise can I keep for you now? Only this, to tell other histories with the same slow care. To set romance beside record and let them talk without shouting. To keep the questions small and regular, like buoys, so we can thread a safe path through any fog the past sends us. And to end where sleep begins, in the quiet competence of people doing their jobs well. So close your eyes. Picture the harbor's mouth and the smooth water beyond it. Picture the table and the small lamp and the page that says enough without saying everything. Let the tide's long breath set your own. When you wake, carry the pilot's verbs into your day. Keep ease, hold, pass. They will be good companions. If you'd like more gentle stories like this, true histories told slowly with care, feel welcome to subscribe, and leave a note in the comments about which mystery you'd like us to explore next. I'll read it with a quiet lamp and a steady hand. Until then, rest well.